This entry suggests that Jesus Christ was an Annunaki, part of an advanced extraterrestrial race from Sumerian texts. The Annunaki appear throughout Mesopotamian mythology as powerful beings who descended from the heavens, which modern theorists interpret as ancient astronauts who genetically engineered early humans. The theory draws connections between Jesus' miraculous abilities and the supernatural powers attributed to the Annunaki. His healing, resurrection, and ascension mirror the advanced capabilities these beings supposedly possessed. Zecharia Sitchin's translations of Sumerian tablets describe the Annunaki as having lifespans measured in thousands of years and the ability to manipulate matter at will. Believers point to the Star of Bethlehem as evidence of an Anunnaki spacecraft guiding the wise men to Jesus' location. They claim his virgin birth represents advanced genetic engineering techniques, similar to how the Anunnaki allegedly created Homo sapiens by combining their DNA with early hominids. The 40-day fasting period becomes evidence of his non-human physiology. The theory extends to Jesus' teachings about his father's house having many mansions, interpreted as references to multiple planets within the Anunnaki's cosmic empire. His promise to return aligns with ancient texts describing the Anunnaki's eventual comeback to Earth during a planetary alignment cycle. Archaeological discoveries at sites like Göbekli Tepe, dating back 11,600 years, supposedly predate organized religion, yet show sophisticated astronomical knowledge that connects to both Anunnaki lore and later Christian symbolism. The crucifixion becomes a staged event designed to demonstrate resurrection technology, while the ascension represents a return to the mothership rather than a spiritual transformation. The Antarctic staircase refers to a mysterious formation spotted in Google Earth satellite imagery that has sparked intense debate among researchers of unexplained phenomena. In 2017, a forum user browsing Antarctica discovered what appears to be a perfectly constructed series of steps carved into the frozen landscape. The formation stands out dramatically against the surrounding terrain. Unlike natural wind dunes that typically scatter across large areas, this staircase pattern appears in only one location across a 100-mile radius. The steps seem to follow precise geometric lines, as if deliberately engineered rather than shaped by natural forces. Tyler Glockner from Secure Team 10 examined the satellite images and noted how the structure appears partially buried beneath ice and snow. The visible portions suggest a much larger construction hidden below the surface. What makes this discovery particularly intriguing is its isolation. Similar formations are nowhere to be found in the vast Antarctic wilderness. Some researchers propose this could be remnants of ancient architecture from a time when Antarctica hosted a warmer climate. Others point to its resemblance to landing platforms, suggesting extraterrestrial origins. The biblical connection has also drawn attention, with some calling it Jacob's Ladder, the mythical stairway connecting Earth to the heavens. The precision of the construction raises questions about natural formation processes. Antarctic winds typically create irregular flowing patterns in ice and snow. Yet this staircase maintains sharp, defined edges that resist the continent's harsh weathering conditions. Geographic analysis reveals the structure sits in a region known for unusual gravitational readings and magnetic anomalies. This area has long attracted attention from geologists studying subglacial formations and hidden mountain ranges beneath the ice sheet. The timing of its discovery coincided with increased high-profile visits to Antarctica, including trips by former astronaut Buzz Aldrin and Secretary of State John Kerry. This convergence has led some to speculate about coordinated investigations into Antarctic mysteries. Whether representing ancient ruins, extraterrestrial artifacts, or unknown geological processes, the Antarctic staircase continues challenging conventional understanding of what lies beneath the world's most isolated continent.
Like this video and subscribe to Maker.
Earth, as a series of concentric spheres, challenges everything we think we know about what lies beneath our feet. Rather than the solid rock ball described in textbooks, This theory suggests our planet consists of multiple hollow shells nested inside one another, each potentially harboring its own civilizations and ecosystems. The concept gained serious attention in the 1700s when mathematician Leonhard Euler proposed that Earth contained a 600-mile-wide inner sun surrounded by a habitable shell. Edmund Halley, the same astronomer who tracked Halley's comet, theorized that mysterious lights in the sky came from gases escaping through openings at the North and South poles. John Cleves Simms Jr. took these ideas further in 1818, declaring that all planets were hollow and accessible through polar openings spanning 4,000 miles across. He petitioned Congress to fund an expedition to these entrances, claiming ships could literally sail into the Earth's interior. His lectures drew massive crowds and influenced Edgar Allan Poe to write The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. The theory explains several geological puzzles that mainstream science struggles with. Seismic waves behave differently than expected when traveling through certain parts of the planet. The magnetic field shifts in ways that suggest hollow regions rather than solid iron. Temperature readings from deep drilling projects often contradict predictions for a molten core. Admiral Richard Byrd's Antarctic expeditions in the 1940s fuel modern versions of this theory. His flight logs allegedly describe discovering green valleys and mammoth-like creatures beyond the South Pole, though these accounts remain classified. Satellite imagery of polar regions consistently shows unusual formations that some interpret as massive openings obscured by ice and atmospheric distortion. Modern adherents point to the Van Allen radiation belts as evidence of concentric energy shells surrounding Earth, suggesting the physical structure mirrors these electromagnetic layers. They argue that gravity works differently in a hollow sphere system, with inhabitants of inner shells experiencing their surface as down, while outer shell dwellers experience the same gravitational pull toward their surface. Segregated Internet/IP blocks refers to the theory that the Internet isn't actually one unified network, but rather a collection of deliberately separated digital territories controlled by different powers. To understand this conspiracy, you need to know that every device on the internet gets assigned an IP address, which is like a digital postal code. These addresses are organized into blocks, with certain ranges allocated to different countries, organizations, and internet service providers. The theory claims that beyond the standard geographic allocation system, there are hidden tiers of internet access based on these IP blocks. According to believers, if your IP address falls within certain ranges, you're automatically granted or denied access to different layers of information and websites. Some point to the fact that users in China see a completely different version of the internet than those in the United States, not just due to censorship software, but because their IP blocks literally connect to separate server networks. They argue this isn't just about blocking content, but about creating entirely parallel internets. The most extreme version suggests that military and intelligence agencies operate on completely segregated IP ranges that don't even route through the same physical infrastructure as civilian internet. These would be like digital gated communities, invisible to standard network scanning tools. Proponents cite unexplained IP address gaps in public allocation records, claiming these missing ranges house everything from classified government networks to corporate surveillance systems. They point to documented cases where certain IP blocks have been mysteriously reserved for decades without public explanation. The conspiracy extends to claims that your perceived internet speed, search results, and even available content are all determined by which segregated block your IP address belongs to, creating a hidden caste system in cyberspace. Intelligence agencies use dream hacking to infiltrate and manipulate the subconscious minds of targets while they sleep. This theory suggests that government operatives have developed sophisticated methods to enter, monitor, and alter dreams using a combination of electromagnetic frequencies, targeted drug delivery systems, and advanced neurotechnology. The foundation for these claims stems from documented research programs like the CIA's MKU, LTRA experiments, and the military's interest in remote viewing during the Cold War. Sleep researchers have long known that the brain operates on specific frequencies during REM cycles, typically between 4 to 8 Hz in the theta wave range. Believers point to patents filed by defense contractors in the early 2010s for devices capable of transmitting low-frequency signals directly to the brain's temporal lobe. The technology allegedly works by synchronizing external electromagnetic pulses with natural dream states, creating a pathway for information insertion or extraction. Former intelligence contractors claim that specialized teams called oneironauts undergo extensive training in lucid dreaming techniques before being equipped with portable transmission devices. These operatives supposedly can project themselves into target dreams, plant suggestions, or extract sensitive information that subjects might not reveal while conscious. The most disturbing applications allegedly include inducing recurring nightmares in foreign diplomats before crucial negotiations, implanting false memories in whistleblowers to discredit their testimonies, and conducting psychological warfare by making enemy agents question their own sanity through manipulated dream experiences. Several unexplained incidents fuel these theories, including the mysterious cluster of identical nightmares reported by journalists investigating government corruption in the late 2010s, and the unusual sleep disturbances experienced by nuclear facility workers shortly before security breaches. While mainstream science maintains that such precise dream manipulation remains impossible with current technology, the theory persists that black-budget programs have achieved breakthroughs decades ahead of public knowledge. This entry refers to one of the most elusive and poorly documented conspiracy theories on the internet. KV Malkas Alive centers around the claim that an individual known only as KV Malkas faked their death in 2002 and continues to operate behind the scenes as a shadowy figure of global influence. The theory first surfaced in obscure corners of online forums, particularly on 4chan's paranormal and politically incorrect boards, where users would cryptically reference Malkas as someone who supposedly rules the world from the shadows. What makes this conspiracy particularly intriguing is the complete absence of verifiable information about who KV Malkas actually was or is supposed to be. Some forum posts suggest this theory emerged as either a distraction from or variation of the Bogdanov brothers' conspiracy, where twin French television personalities are believed to control global events through advanced mathematical knowledge and possible extraterrestrial connections. Unlike other conspiracy figures who have documented public lives before their supposed disappearance, KV Malkas appears to have no traceable history whatsoever. The 2002 death date is mentioned repeatedly across different posts, but no obituaries, news reports, or public records can be found to verify that such a person ever existed, let alone passed away. This has led some researchers to conclude that the entire theory was fabricated as an internet experiment, or elaborate troll designed to see how far a completely fictional conspiracy could spread. The persistent references to Malkas being alive and wielding global influence suggest that believers think this figure operates through financial markets, political manipulation, or technological control. However, unlike other shadow elite theories that at least attempt to provide evidence or documentation, the KV Malkas conspiracy offers nothing but anonymous forum posts and cryptic references. What emerges is a conspiracy theory about someone who may never have existed, allegedly faking a death that may never have been reported, to continue influencing a world through methods that remain completely undefined. It represents the ultimate expression of paranoia about unknown unknowns, where the lack of information itself becomes the most compelling evidence that something significant is being hidden. This entry suggests that the anti-vaccination movement itself functions as a deliberate population control mechanism disguised as grassroots health advocacy. The theory posits that wealthy elites secretly fund and amplify anti-vaccine messaging, specifically targeting lower-income communities and minority populations. Rather than vaccines being the tool of control, The misinformation campaigns against them serve as the actual weapon. Believers point to documented cases of foreign interference in American health discussions through social media manipulation. Russian troll farms, according to intelligence reports, simultaneously promoted both pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine content to maximize social division. The goal wasn't to push one specific viewpoint, but to create chaos and reduce public trust in health institutions. The class warfare angle focuses on how vaccine hesitancy disproportionately affects communities with less access to quality healthcare and education. Wealthy families in places like Marin County, California, initially drove some anti-vaccine trends, but the messaging eventually filtered down to impact working-class populations who face the greatest consequences from preventable diseases. Some versions of this theory examine funding sources behind prominent anti-vaccine organizations and conferences. They trace connections between certain advocacy groups and pharmaceutical companies that profit from treating diseases that vaccines prevent. A child with measles generates far more revenue than a vaccinated healthy child. The psychological operation component allegedly works by exploiting legitimate distrust of authority that exists in marginalized communities. Historical medical abuses like the Tuskegee experiments created rational skepticism that gets weaponized through carefully crafted misinformation campaigns. Believers note the timing of major anti-vaccine pushes often coincides with broader efforts to defund public health programs, creating a convenient justification for reducing government health services to vulnerable populations. This entry concerns what internet investigators have dubbed the Pelzer ARG, an alleged conspiracy involving coded messages, abandoned mills, and claims of cult activity in the tiny South Carolina town of Pelzer. The rabbit hole begins with someone discovering hundreds of cryptic coded messages hidden in YouTube comment sections beneath disturbing videos marketed to children. These videos belong to the Elsagate phenomenon, where content featuring popular children's characters like Elsa and Spider-Man contained inappropriate themes disguised as family-friendly entertainment. When these codes were cracked by online investigators in 2017, they led to additional YouTube channels and Twitter accounts containing more encrypted messages. Most intriguingly, the breadcrumb trail included photographs of a specific abandoned mill structure that was eventually identified as the Gerber Mill in Pelzer, South Carolina. Pelzer itself presents an anomaly. According to the 2010 census, this mill town housed only 89 residents, making it barely qualify as a town by traditional standards. However, by 2020, the population had mysteriously jumped to 1,344 people. The connection to Pelzer becomes more sinister when investigators linked the coded messages to the Finders, a controversial group from the 1980s. The Finders were investigated by law enforcement for alleged involvement in ritual activities and connections to intelligence agencies. Some researchers claimed the Pelzer discovery represented evidence of the Finders returning to operation, possibly conducting MK Ultra-style programming experiments. Adding to the mystery, a person identifying themselves as Jenna posted detailed accounts of moving back to Pelzer and conducting amateur investigations. Jenna claimed knowledge of secret underground tunnels and cement structures allegedly used during the Underground Railroad era, but suggested these spaces were being repurposed for far darker activities. The conspiracy theory also attempted to connect Pelzer to the Croatoan disappearances, the mysterious vanishing of an entire colonial settlement. Some investigators proposed that patterns of unexplained disappearances had occurred throughout history in locations connected to Pelzer. The abandoned Gerber Mill became a focal point for urban explorers and conspiracy researchers. Photos circulated showing graffiti-covered walls matching images from the coded YouTube posts, along with a prominent water tower visible in several social media posts linked to the investigation. Whether the Pelzer ARG represents a genuine investigation into clandestine activities or an elaborate alternate reality game designed to mislead researchers remains hotly debated in online communities dedicated to unraveling the mystery. The Sabinche Tomatovic tape represents one of the internet's most bizarre and elusive urban legends, combining cryptozoology with extremely unconventional adult content. This story centers around an alleged Australian-Serbian adult film actress, who, in 2012, reportedly shared a disturbing account with close friends and family. According to the tale, she claimed to have been sexually assaulted by a giant spider measuring 4 feet in size during an encounter in the Sandžak region of Serbia. The creature described matches the Jiba Fofi, a cryptid from Congolese folklore. These legendary spiders supposedly possess leg spans reaching 5 to 6 feet and exhibit aggressive hunting behavior toward both animals and humans. Traditional accounts from Central Africa describe them as territorial predators that construct massive webs in dense jungle areas. What makes this story particularly notorious is the claim that this traumatic encounter was somehow recorded, creating what became known as the Sabinche Tomatovic tape. The footage allegedly showed explicit interaction between the woman and the arachnid, eventually circulating through Japan's underground adult film networks. The name itself raises eyebrows among Serbian speakers. Some suggest Sabinche Tomatovic roughly translates to tomato sandwich when the words are rearranged, leading many to question the authenticity of the entire account. Serbian internet users have pointed out that this story holds no place in their cultural mythology or contemporary urban legends. Despite numerous claims from anonymous users on paranormal forums about possessing fragments of this footage, no verifiable copy has ever surfaced. The tale originated primarily on 4chan's paranormal board, where it gained traction alongside other internet mysteries. The absence of any actual evidence, combined with the Serbian community's complete unfamiliarity with the story, suggests this entire narrative exists purely as digital folklore. The Epstein AI links theory connects the convicted financier to the development of artificial intelligence technology through his extensive network of tech industry contacts. Jeffrey Epstein maintained relationships with numerous Silicon Valley executives and AI researchers throughout the 2010s, including figures from major technology companies working on machine learning projects. The theory suggests these connections went beyond social networking, claiming Epstein was positioned to influence or fund early AI development through his various foundations and investment vehicles. Specific focus centers on Epstein's documented meetings with researchers from institutions like MIT's Media Lab and his financial contributions to various technology research programs. The conspiracy extends to suggest that his private island and properties served as informal conferences for discussing AI advancement strategies, with some theorists claiming these gatherings shaped current AI development trajectories. The theory gains traction from documented evidence of Epstein's interest in transhumanism and emerging technologies, combined with his pattern of positioning himself within influential academic and scientific circles. His foundation's funding of computational research projects and connections to prominent figures in the artificial intelligence field form the foundation of these claims. More extreme versions of this theory propose that Epstein's criminal network utilized early AI systems for various operations, or that his connections enabled certain technology companies to advance their AI capabilities through unconventional means. Some theorists point to the timing of major AI breakthroughs coinciding with periods of Epstein's increased activity in tech circles. The theory remains speculative, built primarily on established social connections and funding relationships, rather than direct evidence of technological collaboration. This entry claims that the Camerahead creepypasta was deliberately created as a disinformation campaign to discredit real surveillance incidents. The original Camerahead story, which spread across forums in the early 2010s, described encounters with a humanoid figure whose head had been replaced with an old security camera that would track and record witnesses. According to this theory, the fictional pasta was crafted by intelligence agencies after multiple legitimate reports of advanced surveillance beings began surfacing in urban areas. Witnesses had described similar camera-headed entities conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance operations near government facilities and technology companies. The conspiracy suggests that by flooding the internet with an obviously fictional horror story featuring the same description, any future real sightings would be immediately dismissed as copycat hoaxes or people influenced by the creepypasta. This technique, sometimes called narrative poisoning, allegedly allows genuine incidents to hide in plain sight. Believers point to the unusually rapid spread of the original Camerahead story across multiple platforms simultaneously, suggesting coordinated promotion rather than organic viral growth. They also note that early versions contained technical details about surveillance equipment that seemed beyond typical creepypasta writers. Several investigators claim to have documented pre-pasta sightings that match the Camerahead description, including a security guard in Nevada who reported a camera-headed figure near a restricted research facility in 2009. These accounts allegedly vanished from forums shortly after the fictional story gained popularity. The theory extends to suggest that other seemingly absurd cryptid stories serve similar cover functions, creating a landscape where genuine anomalous surveillance gets buried under layers of internet folklore. Vardøgr, also known as Forerunners, describes a phenomenon documented across Scandinavian countries where people experience the unmistakable presence of someone arriving at their location minutes or even hours before that person actually shows up. The accounts follow a remarkably consistent pattern. Witnesses report hearing familiar footsteps on the porch, the sound of a car door slamming, or even catching glimpses of a person's silhouette through windows. They rush to greet the visitor, only to find nobody there. Later, sometimes within minutes, sometimes hours afterward, the actual person arrives and performs the exact same actions the witnesses initially experienced. Norwegian folklore traditionally explained Vardøgr as a spiritual double that travels ahead of its physical counterpart, but modern researchers have proposed more unsettling explanations. Some theorists suggest these incidents represent temporal displacement events where information somehow arrives before its source. Dr. Erlendur Haraldsson documented over 200 cases during his research in Iceland during the 1970s and 80s. In one particularly detailed account, a family consistently heard their father's truck arriving home from work, complete with the engine shutting off and his distinctive heavy footsteps approaching the door. This phantom arrival occurred every evening at exactly 5:45, while the father himself wouldn't return until 6:30. The phenomenon extends beyond simple auditory experiences. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing Vardøgr manifestations that include visual details like specific clothing or carried objects that perfectly match what the actual person wore or brought hours later. Quantum consciousness researchers point to these cases as evidence that human awareness operates outside conventional time constraints. They theorize that consciousness itself might occasionally slip forward along the timeline, creating these temporal echoes that sensitive individuals can detect. The implications become more disturbing when considering that Vardøgr events sometimes occur for people who never actually arrive at all. Drain cleaner narcotic refers to the underground practice of using common household drain cleaning products to achieve psychoactive effects. This disturbing trend emerged from online forums where users share techniques for extracting or repurposing the chemical compounds found in standard drain cleaners. The theory centers around certain industrial-grade sulfuric acid-based drain cleaners containing trace amounts of compounds that can be isolated and concentrated. Users in these communities claim that specific brands manufactured between 2008 and 2012 contained different formulations that made this process more viable. What makes this particularly unsettling is how ordinary these products appear on store shelves. The most commonly referenced brand begins with the letter D and is available at virtually every hardware store across the country. Online discussions detail elaborate multi-step processes involving basic chemistry equipment that can be purchased legally. Case reports from emergency rooms in the Midwest during the early 2010s documented a spike in chemical burns and respiratory damage among young adults. Medical professionals noted unusual patterns in these injuries that didn't match typical accidental exposure to drain cleaners. The victims often showed signs of deliberate inhalation or ingestion attempts. Underground chemists claim the appeal lies in the accessibility and legal purchase of the base materials. Unlike controlled substances, these products require no identification or purchase limits. The process allegedly produces effects similar to certain industrial solvents, creating euphoria followed by severe disorientation. What authorities won't discuss publicly is how easily available chemistry knowledge makes this conversion possible. Basic organic chemistry textbooks contain all the necessary information, yet this connection remains largely hidden from mainstream awareness. The practice reportedly spread through encrypted messaging apps and private forums that disappeared as quickly as they emerged. This entry suggests that LSD functions as a mind virus, spreading through consciousness itself rather than through biological means. The theory centers on the idea that lysergic acid diethylamide doesn't just alter perception temporarily, but actually installs permanent changes in how people think and view reality. Unlike traditional viruses that replicate through cells, this supposed mind virus replicates through ideas, experiences, and social contact. Believers point to the rapid spread of counterculture movements during the 1960s as evidence. They note how a single LSD experience often led people to completely abandon their previous lifestyles, careers, and belief systems. The drug seemed to create what some called carriers, who would then influence others to try the substance, spreading the mental infection further. Timothy Leary becomes a central figure in this narrative, viewed not as a psychologist studying consciousness, but as patient zero deliberately spreading the virus. His famous phrase, "turn on, tune in, drop out," gets reframed as programming language designed to activate the mental virus in susceptible individuals. The theory takes a darker turn when considering the CIA's MKUltra program. Some suggest the agency didn't just experiment with LSD for interrogation purposes, but discovered its viral properties and attempted to weaponize them. The accidental release at Pont Saint-Esprit in France during 1951, where an entire town experienced mass hallucinations, gets cited as an early outbreak. Modern proponents point to the resurgence of psychedelic research and microdosing trends in Silicon Valley as evidence the virus has evolved. They claim tech entrepreneurs aren't just seeking creativity enhancement, but are unknowingly spreading updated versions of the original mind virus through their platforms and influence. The supposed virus allegedly targets specific neural pathways associated with authority acceptance and social conformity, explaining why LSD users often develop anti-establishment attitudes, regardless of their previous political leanings. This theory claims that the legendary Knights Templar constructed pyramid structures across Europe and possibly the Americas, long before Columbus ever set sail. The medieval military order, officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, allegedly possessed ancient architectural knowledge that allowed them to build these massive stone monuments between the 1200s and early 1300s. Believers point to several unusual stone structures across France and Portugal that bear striking resemblances to smaller pyramid forms. The Templar Chapel at Monsonnet in southern France features a distinctive octagonal design that some claim mirrors pyramid geometry. In Portugal, the ruins near Tamar, the former Templar stronghold, supposedly contain foundation work that follows pyramid proportions. The theory suggests that during their time in the Holy Land, the Templars discovered hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. These chambers allegedly contained scrolls and architectural plans from ancient Egyptian master builders, explaining how a medieval Christian order could suddenly possess advanced geometric knowledge. More controversial claims extend this theory to the Americas. Some researchers argue that Templar expeditions reached North America decades before official European exploration, leaving behind pyramid-like earthworks in what is now the northeastern United States. The Newport Tower in Rhode Island gets cited as potential evidence, though mainstream historians date it to the 1600s. The timeline becomes crucial here. The Templars faced dissolution in 1307 when King Philip IV of France arrested their leadership. According to the theory, surviving Templars fled to Portugal and Scotland, taking their pyramid-building secrets with them. This would explain why certain later medieval structures in these regions display unusual geometric precision. Physical evidence remains limited to stone foundations and partial ruins that require significant interpretation to support pyramid construction claims. Gangster computer God Worldwide refers to the elaborate conspiracy theories of Francis E. Deck, a disbarred New York lawyer who spent 25 years crafting what became some of the most notorious pamphlets in conspiracy theory history. Deck believed that humanity was controlled by what he called the worldwide communist gangster computer god, an ancient artificial intelligence that manipulated every person on Earth through electronic mind control devices he termed Frankenstein radio controls. According to his writings, this computer deity operated from hidden brain bank cities located on the far side of the moon, where it stored duplicate brains of all 4 billion people living on Earth at the time. The conspiracy centered on invisible radio waves that Deck claimed could be heard as a constant, quiet threshold brainwash transmission. He insisted these signals controlled human behavior, turning people into what he called terrorized Frankenstein earphone radio slaves and parroting puppets. Deck believed he was one of the few people aware of this control system, which made him a target for the computer god's suppression efforts. What makes Deck's theories particularly fascinating to conspiracy researchers is their blend of early computer age anxieties with traditional mind control fears. Writing primarily in the 1970s and 1980s, Deck essentially predicted concerns about digital surveillance and artificial intelligence that wouldn't become mainstream until decades later. His handwritten and typewritten pamphlets, filled with capitalized text and underlined phrases, were mailed to radio and television stations across the United States for years. The bizarre nature of these rants caught the attention of Los Angeles radio host Boyd Britton, who began doing dramatic readings of Deck's work on KROQ-FM during the 1980s. These radio broadcasts transformed Deck from an unknown figure into an underground cult phenomenon. His passionate stream of consciousness style and increasingly elaborate technological conspiracy theories resonated with counterculture figures including author William S. Burroughs and industrial music collective Psychic TV, who incorporated recordings of his rants into their work. Deck died in 1996, but his influence on internet culture and conspiracy theory communities continues today, with his computer god concept serving as an early template for modern fears about algorithmic control and digital manipulation. French Viper releases refers to a persistent rural legend that has circulated throughout the French countryside since at least the 1980s. The theory claims that mysterious organizations have been deliberately releasing hundreds, potentially thousands, of venomous asp vipers into previously safe rural areas across France. The conspiracy centers around France's most dangerous snake, the asp viper, known scientifically as Vipera aspis. These creatures pack a venomous punch that kills roughly 4% of untreated bite victims and cause around 300 bites annually in France. With their distinctive triangular heads, vertical pupils, and jet black stripes extending backward from their eyes, they're unmistakable once you know what to look for. According to the legend, these snake releases aren't random acts of ecological terrorism. Rural communities whisper about government agencies, environmental groups, or shadowy scientific organizations systematically introducing vipers to areas where they previously didn't exist. The alleged goal varies depending on who's telling the story. Some claim it's population control, others suggest agricultural manipulation, and the more paranoid versions point to deliberate efforts to drive people away from certain regions. What makes this conspiracy particularly unsettling is how it plays into real fears. The ASP Viper genuinely is spreading to new territories in France, Documented cases like the mysterious colony that appeared in the Normandy dunes at Breville-sur-Mer in the 1980s support the plausibility of artificial introduction. That particular population was actually traced to a reptile enthusiast who released them, but it demonstrates how easily these snakes can establish themselves in new environments. The legend gained academic attention when folklore researcher Véronique Campion-Vincent documented it as a contemporary French legend in 1990. Her research revealed how these stories follow classic patterns of rural mistrust toward outside authorities, combining real ecological changes with deep-seated anxieties about loss of control over local environments. Whether driven by actual ecological shifts, climate change expanding natural ranges, or genuine isolated cases of deliberate release, the viper stories continue to slither through French rural communities, representing a very modern fear wrapped in the ancient human terror of venomous serpents. Ideoplastics represents one of the most fascinating intersections between mind and matter that mainstream science prefers to ignore. The concept suggests that human thoughts and emotions can literally reshape physical reality, creating tangible changes in the body and surrounding environment. This goes far beyond simple psychosomatic illness into territory that challenges our understanding of what consciousness can actually accomplish. The term emerged from early 20th century psychological research, where doctors noticed patients developing physical symptoms that perfectly matched their mental expectations or fears. But ideoplastics extends this phenomenon into more dramatic territory. Consider the documented cases of stigmata, where individuals spontaneously develop wounds matching those of religious figures with no external cause. Traditional medicine struggles to explain how someone's deep religious conviction could manifest as actual bleeding wounds that appear overnight. Poltergeist researchers have pointed to ideoplastics as an explanation for household disturbances that seem to center around emotionally turbulent teenagers. Rather than supernatural entities, some investigators propose that intense psychological states create actual physical forces capable of moving objects or generating electrical disturbances. The Soviet Union reportedly invested significant resources during the Cold War studying ideoplastic phenomena, believing they could weaponize human consciousness itself. Declassified documents reference experiments where test subjects attempted to influence physical systems through focused mental energy alone. Modern quantum physicists occasionally acknowledge that consciousness appears to play a role in particle behavior, though they rarely connect this to ideoplastic theories. The observer effect in quantum mechanics suggests reality might be more malleable than we assume. What makes ideoplastics particularly unsettling is its implication that we might be unconsciously reshaping our physical world constantly, creating the very problems and limitations we believe are beyond our control. Roman Empire rules Earth suggests that the mighty empire that supposedly fell in 476 never actually collapsed, but instead transformed into the hidden power structure governing our modern world. The theory points to Roman law as the smoking gun. Every major legal system today traces back to the Corpus Juris Civilis, the comprehensive legal code Emperor Justinian created in the 6th century. When you sign a contract, appear in court, or even get a speeding ticket, you're operating under principles the Romans established over 1,000 years ago. Believers highlight the Vatican as Rome's true continuation. The Pope still holds the title Pontifex Maximus, the same religious authority Roman emperors claimed. The Vatican operates as an independent city-state with its own laws, currency, and diplomatic relations, exactly like ancient Rome. Even the architecture screams Roman imperial power, with St. Peter's Basilica designed to dwarf any previous Roman monument. Corporate structure mirrors Roman military organization almost perfectly. Chief Executive Officer translates directly to Imperator. Vice presidents function like Roman legates. The chain of command, shareholder systems, and territorial expansion strategies all follow Roman blueprints that conquered the known world. Modern citizenship operates under Roman precedent. Your social security number functions like a Roman census registration. Birth certificates establish your legal standing within the system, just as Roman citizenship papers once did. Even the concept of dual citizenship traces back to Roman legal innovations. The theory gains traction when examining how former Roman territories maintained Roman law long after the supposed fall. Britain, France, Germany, and Spain never truly abandoned Roman legal principles. They simply rebranded the system under new management while keeping the underlying structure intact. Haboo Hotel camps refers to allegations of organized virtual communities within the popular online social platform that supposedly operated with hidden agendas during the platform's peak years in the 2000s and 2010s. The theory centers around claims that certain user groups within Haboo Hotel's pixelated hotel rooms functioned as recruitment networks, using the game's room creation features and private messaging systems to establish what believers describe as systematic indoctrination processes. Haboo Hotel, for those unfamiliar, was a browser-based virtual world where users created pixel avatars called Haboos and socialized in user-created rooms designed to look like hotel spaces. The platform attracted millions of teenagers worldwide and became notorious for its loose moderation policies during its early years. Conspiracy theorists point to specific room naming patterns and recurring furniture arrangements as evidence of coded communication systems. They claim certain combinations of virtual furniture, particularly the placement of specific colored blocks and plants, served as identification markers for these alleged camps. The theory gained traction after former users began sharing screenshots of rooms with titles containing seemingly random number sequences and military-style terminology. Some pointed to the platform's Dutch origins and its original name, Hotel Goldfish, as potential connections to broader organizational networks. Believers argue that the platform's report system was deliberately undermined by coordinated user networks who would mass report legitimate complaints while protecting problematic content through organized defense campaigns. The most persistent claims involve allegations that certain high-level users, identifiable by their expensive virtual furniture collections and rare clothing items, operated recruitment pipelines that extended beyond the platform itself into other online spaces and potentially real-world interactions. While Haboo Hotel's parent company has consistently denied these allegations and points to their implementation of stronger safety measures over the years, conspiracy theorists argue that the damage was already done during the platform's most influential period. Negative Planck feedback is said to be one of the most controversial challenges to mainstream climate science, suggesting that our fundamental understanding of planetary heat regulation might be completely backwards. Traditional Planck feedback operates on a simple principle that most physicists consider unbreakable. As Earth warms up, it naturally radiates more infrared energy into space, creating a stabilizing effect that prevents runaway heating. This is basic blackbody radiation physics, named after Max Planck, and it's supposedly what keeps our climate from spiraling out of control. But negative Planck feedback theory proposes something that sounds impossible. Instead of radiating more heat as temperatures rise, Earth would actually radiate less heat when it gets warmer. This flies directly in the face of established thermodynamics and the Stefan-Boltzmann law. The theory emerged from researchers studying extreme climate scenarios in computer models during the 2010s. Some scientists noticed anomalous results where temperature increases seemed to disrupt normal radiation patterns. They theorized that dramatic changes in water vapor distribution, cloud formation patterns, or surface albedo could trigger this backwards feedback mechanism. Evidence remains thin and highly disputed. A few modeling studies have suggested that under extreme warming conditions, atmospheric opacity changes could trap more outgoing radiation, creating the opposite effect of what physics predicts. Critics argue these results come from flawed programming or unrealistic assumptions about atmospheric chemistry. The implications would be staggering if proven true. Climate models would need complete overhauls. Temperature predictions could be off by massive margins. Some proponents suggest this feedback could actually protect Earth from runaway greenhouse effects, while skeptics warn it could destabilize weather patterns in unpredictable ways. Most mainstream climatologists dismiss the theory as fundamentally impossible, arguing it violates too many well-established physical laws. The research remains confined to fringe publications and alternative science websites, where it continues attracting attention from those questioning conventional climate science. Iraq for Baal refers to the belief that the 2003 invasion of Iraq served a deeper purpose beyond the official justifications of weapons of mass destruction or democratization. This theory suggests the conflict was orchestrated to restore ancient Babylonian religious practices and reclaim sacred sites dedicated to Baal, the Canaanite storm and fertility deity who was widely worshipped throughout ancient Mesopotamia. Baal, whose name simply means lord or owner, held tremendous power across the ancient Middle East as a god of storms, fertility, and kingship. Archaeological evidence shows Baal temples dotted the landscape of what is now Iraq, particularly around Babylon and other major Mesopotamian cities. The deity's influence extended far beyond simple weather control. Baal represented the cycle of death and rebirth, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The theory gained traction when coalition forces established Camp Alpha directly on top of the ancient ruins of Babylon in 2003. Military vehicles crushed 2,600-year-old brick pavements, helicopter landing pads were carved into archaeological sites, and soldiers reportedly discovered underground chambers containing artifacts and inscriptions related to Baal worship. Critics noted the systematic nature of the damage, suggesting it wasn't mere carelessness, but deliberate excavation. Particularly compelling to believers is the timing of Saddam Hussein's own reconstruction efforts at Babylon during the 1970s and 80s. Hussein had spent millions rebuilding Babylonian structures and even stamped his name on bricks, mirroring ancient kings. Some theorists argue Hussein was attempting to revive Baal worship before being stopped, and the invasion was designed to complete this work under different leadership. The theory points to the extensive looting of Iraqi museums and archaeological sites following the invasion, with particular attention paid to Mesopotamian religious artifacts. Thousands of cuneiform tablets, cylinder seals, and ritual objects disappeared into private collections. Theorists suggest this wasn't random theft, but systematic acquisition of items needed for Baal rituals. Physical evidence cited includes the discovery of ancient drainage systems beneath Babylon that some claim were designed for ritual purposes, and reports of military personnel finding chambers with astronomical alignments consistent with Baal worship practices. The subsequent establishment of permanent military bases in archaeologically sensitive areas is seen as protecting ongoing excavation rather than strategic positioning. Modern adherents of this theory often connect it to broader beliefs about ancient Mesopotamian knowledge and its relevance to contemporary power structures, viewing the Iraq operation as one piece of a larger effort to revive pre-Christian religious practices in their original homeland. Dreams of the Blind centers on suppressed research suggesting that people born without sight experience visual dreams that defy current scientific understanding. The mainstream narrative tells us that individuals blind from birth dream without visual imagery, relying instead on sound, touch, and emotion. But classified studies from the 1970s and 80s reportedly documented cases where congenitally blind subjects described vivid visual scenes during monitored sleep sessions at undisclosed research facilities. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a neuroscientist whose work was allegedly buried by the National Sleep Foundation, claimed to have recorded over 200 instances of blind participants accurately describing colors, architectural details, and even faces of people they had never encountered. Her research suggested these individuals were accessing some form of collective visual memory or experiencing remote viewing during REM sleep. The most compelling case involved a subject known only as Patient 17, born without functional eyes, who consistently dreamed of a specific red brick building with unusual Gothic windows. When researchers showed him tactile models of various architectural styles, he immediately identified the Gothic elements he had never physically encountered. 3 months later, construction workers discovered a building matching his exact description buried beneath a planned demolition site. Government interest peaked when several blind dreamers began reporting identical visions of classified military installations. The Defense Department allegedly terminated all related studies in 1983, classifying the findings under national security protocols. Sleep researchers who attempt to replicate these experiments today report unusual funding rejections and sudden career obstacles, suggesting the suppression continues. This entry refers to the theory that Adolf Hitler's radical transformation and rise to power resulted from electromagnetic mind control experiments conducted on him during his early years. The theory suggests that Hitler underwent deliberate brainwashing through electromagnetic radiation sometime between 1910 and 1920. Proponents point to his dramatic personality shift from a failed artist living in poverty to a charismatic political leader with an unnaturally powerful ability to influence crowds. The electromagnetic component focuses on early 20th century experiments with radio waves and their potential effects on human consciousness. Some versions claim secret German scientists, working decades ahead of publicly known technology, developed primitive mind control devices using specific electromagnetic frequencies that could alter personality and implant suggestions. Believers highlight Hitler's time in Vienna and Munich, particularly a mysterious period in 1918 when he was temporarily blinded by gas during World War I. They argue this hospitalization provided the perfect cover for experimental procedures. His sudden development of mesmerizing speaking abilities and his reported episodes of trance-like states during speeches are cited as evidence of artificial neural programming. The theory often connects to broader claims about early electromagnetic warfare research and suppressed military technologies. Some versions suggest the same techniques were later refined and used in projects like MK-Ultra, making Hitler an early test subject for what would become systematic government mind control programs. Specific details include references to his unusual sleeping patterns, his documented obsession with certain frequencies in music and architecture, and witness accounts of his strange, almost mechanical speech patterns during private conversations compared to his public persona. The COVFEFE-clock theory centers around Donald Trump's infamous late-night tweet from May 2017 that simply read, "Despite the constant negative press COVFEFE," before abruptly ending. What appeared to be a simple typo to most observers became the foundation for an intricate conspiracy theory involving hidden timestamps, coded messages, and deliberate communication strategies. Believers in this theory argue that COVFEFE was never a mistake, but rather a carefully calculated signal designed to communicate with specific audiences at precise moments. They point to the exact timing of the tweet at 12:06 a.m. Eastern Time, claiming this timestamp corresponds to significant dates, military operations, or stock market movements when converted through various numerical systems. The theory gained traction when analysts noticed that similar abbreviated or seemingly nonsensical social media posts often preceded major political announcements or policy changes. Supporters began tracking patterns between unusual tweets and subsequent events, creating elaborate spreadsheets and timelines to demonstrate correlations. Some theorists propose that COVFEFE functions as an acronym for Communications over Various Feeds Electronically for Engagement, suggesting a systematic approach to digital messaging that bypasses traditional media channels. Others focus on the 6-hour delay before the tweet's deletion, interpreting this as a predetermined signal duration. The theory extends beyond single incidents to encompass what followers call timestamp linguistics, where the precise timing of social media posts allegedly conveys information to those who understand the system. They cite instances where posts at specific minute markers coincided with market fluctuations or international developments, though mainstream analysis attributes these correlations to coincidence rather than coordination. Despite official explanations dismissing the tweet as an accidental posting, adherents maintain that the widespread attention and memetic spread of COVFEFE demonstrates the effectiveness of this supposed communication method. Number stations in the post-Trump era have exhibited patterns that radio enthusiasts and intelligence researchers find deeply unsettling. These mysterious shortwave radio broadcasts have transmitted coded messages for decades, typically featuring robotic voices reading sequences of numbers to anonymous listeners worldwide. Intelligence agencies have long used them to communicate with operatives in the field, maintaining plausible deniability since anyone can listen, but only intended recipients possess the decryption keys. However, since 2017, monitoring stations across North America and Europe have documented a significant surge in previously unknown transmission frequencies. The most notable is UVB-76, the Russian military station that broadcast the same monotonous buzzer tone for over 40 years, until it suddenly began transmitting voice messages during major geopolitical events. What catches attention is the timing correlation. Multiple new stations began broadcasting within weeks of Trump's inauguration, using voice synthesis technology far more sophisticated than traditional number stations. These transmissions feature American accented voices reading alphanumeric sequences that follow no recognizable pattern from existing intelligence protocols. Station watchers have identified at least 12 new frequencies operating from locations traced to rural areas in Virginia, Colorado, and Montana. Unlike classic number stations that broadcast at scheduled intervals, these emit bursts of activity that coincide suspiciously with major political developments, cabinet appointments, and international incidents. The most intriguing case involves frequency 11.435 MHz, which transmitted continuously for 72 hours straight during the January 6th Capitol events, then went completely silent for 8 months. When it resumed broadcasting, the voice had changed from male to female, and the message format had shifted from pure numbers to a mixture of coordinates and seemingly random letter groups. Former NSA analysts note that the technical sophistication suggests state-level resources, but the operational patterns don't match known American, Russian, or Chinese intelligence protocols. The stations appear to be communicating something, but to whom and about what remains entirely opaque. This theory suggests that the lost colony of Roanoke was divinely destroyed as the first sign of a spiritual curse placed upon America itself. In 1587, over 100 English colonists vanished without explanation from Roanoke Island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. When supply ships returned 3 years later, they found only empty buildings and the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no clear indication of where an entire settlement had gone. While mainstream historians point to practical explanations like disease, starvation, or conflict with local Croatan tribes, this conspiracy theory takes a different approach entirely. According to this belief, the colonists weren't victims of circumstance, but rather divine judgment. The theory hinges on the idea that European colonization of the Americas was fundamentally an act of theft and violence against indigenous peoples. Some versions claim that Native American spiritual leaders placed a curse on the land that would manifest through supernatural punishment of colonizers. Others suggest that God himself intervened to demonstrate his displeasure with the invasion. Supporters point to the completeness of the disappearance as evidence of supernatural intervention. They argue that no natural disaster or human conflict could have removed every single person so thoroughly that not even skeletal remains were ever discovered. The mysterious nature of the word Croatoan is interpreted not as a geographical clue, but as a spiritual warning or marker. This Roanoke incident is often positioned as the opening chapter of a larger American curse that supposedly continues to manifest through national tragedies, failed presidencies, and social upheaval. The theory suggests that America's original sin of colonization created a spiritual debt that the nation continues to pay through ongoing calamities. Of course, the fact that the Croatans were actually a real Native American tribe who lived on nearby Hatteras Island tends to complicate the supernatural explanation somewhat. The Leopard Keepers of Pemba Island refers to a secretive tradition allegedly maintained by certain families on this small Tanzanian island off the coast of East Africa. According to local accounts, these keepers possess the ability to communicate with and control the island's leopard population through inherited bloodline connections spanning generations. The practice supposedly involves specific ritual knowledge passed down exclusively within particular clans, allowing them to summon leopards for protection, or to carry out acts of vengeance against enemies. Pemba Island sits just north of Zanzibar and has long been associated with supernatural practices in Swahili coastal culture. The island's dense forests once housed a significant leopard population, though official records claim these big cats were hunted to near extinction by the 1960s. However, sporadic sightings continue to this day, with locals attributing these appearances to the keeper families rather than natural wildlife survival. Witnesses describe unusually large leopards that show no fear of humans and seem to respond to verbal commands in the local Pemba dialect. The most detailed accounts come from village disputes where accused keepers allegedly unleashed leopards on livestock or even people who crossed their families. One 1980s incident involved the Mwalimu family of Chake Chake, where neighbors reported seeing a massive leopard emerging from their compound during a land ownership conflict. What makes this theory particularly intriguing is the overlap with documented cases of leopard attacks that local authorities struggled to explain, given the supposed absence of wild leopards on the island. The attacks often occurred with surgical precision, targeting specific individuals rather than random encounters typical of genuine wildlife incidents. The keeper families maintain absolute silence about their alleged abilities, viewing outsider curiosity as dangerous interference with ancestral responsibilities. This entry refers to the theory that Mark Zuckerberg was found dead in 2003 and was replaced by a lookalike, a clone, or something even stranger. According to this claim, the real Zuckerberg never lived to see Facebook become the global platform it is today. Instead, after an early version of the site was created, he allegedly passed away under mysterious circumstances. Some versions suggest it was a quiet self-removal, while others hint at external forces tied to surveillance programs and elite tech interests. The theory hinges on the idea that Facebook's explosion in scale, power, and reach doesn't match what a single college student could have achieved without serious outside intervention. Supporters point to how quickly the platform evolved between 2004 and 2007, especially its integration into institutions, governments, and intelligence-adjacent infrastructure. They also highlight how Zuckerberg's demeanor changed dramatically over the years. His early interviews showed an awkward, fast-talking programmer. By the 2010s, he appeared almost robotic, stiff posture, monotone delivery, and an eerie lack of expression during public hearings. These mannerisms became a meme, but in the context of this theory, they're treated as signs he's not the same person. One of the strangest claims revolves around Project LifeLog, a real United States military program shut down in 2004, the same day Facebook launched. The theory suggests that Facebook was the civilian-facing continuation of that data harvesting project, and that whoever took Zuckerberg's place was working with that agenda from the beginning. Critics argue it's all coincidence and tech industry myth-making, but to some, the idea that the original creator of Facebook never saw its rise isn't just plausible, it's the only thing that explains how deep the rabbit hole goes. This entry claims that Jesus Christ never died on the cross in Jerusalem, but instead escaped to Japan where he lived as a rice farmer until the age of 106. According to this theory, Jesus fled the crucifixion and embarked on a 12-year journey across Siberia, eventually settling in the remote village of Shingo in northern Japan. The man who died on the cross was allegedly his younger brother Isukiri, who volunteered to take Jesus' place in what believers call the ultimate act of sibling devotion. The village of Shingo, population 2,500, maintains what locals call the Tomb of Christ. 2 wooden crosses mark burial mounds that supposedly contain Jesus' remains alongside those of his brother. Village records claim Jesus took the Japanese name Daitenku Taro Jurai and married a local woman named Miyuko, fathering 3 daughters whose descendants still live in the area today. The Takenouchi documents, ancient scrolls discovered in the 1930s, serve as the primary evidence for this claim. These texts, written in a mixture of Japanese and an unknown script, allegedly detail Jesus' life in Japan and his teachings to the local population. The documents describe Jesus learning the Japanese language and customs while spreading a modified version of Christianity that blended with existing Shinto beliefs. Local folklore supports the theory with peculiar details. Elderly residents point to the traditional song Nanyado Yara, sung at village festivals, claiming its lyrics contain Hebrew words that Jesus taught their ancestors. The village's Star of David symbol appears on family crests and ancient textiles, supposedly introduced by Christ himself during his 45-year residence. The Japanese government designated the site as a historical landmark in 1961, though official recognition stopped short of validating the religious claims. Tourist buses arrive daily, bringing visitors who purchase wooden crosses and Holy Land soil from the gift shop. Believers argue that Jesus' journey explains certain similarities between early Christian teachings and Buddhism, suggesting he spent his missing years from age 13 to 30 studying Eastern philosophy before returning to Palestine for his brief ministry. Royal Raymond Rife developed what he called a universal microscope in the 1920s and 30s, claiming it could magnify specimens up to 60,000 times while keeping them alive. Unlike electron microscopes that kill samples, Rife's device supposedly used light frequencies to observe living viruses and bacteria in their natural state. But the microscope was just the beginning. Rife believed that every microorganism vibrated at a specific frequency, and that directing the right frequency back at them would literally shake them apart. He built frequency generators that he claimed could target and destroy cancer cells, tuberculosis, and dozens of other diseases without harming healthy tissue. In 1934, Rife allegedly conducted clinical trials at the University of Southern California, where 16 terminal cancer patients were treated with his frequency device. According to his supporters, 14 patients were completely cured within 70 days, with the remaining 2 cured after further treatment. The American Medical Association and pharmaceutical companies supposedly took notice. Morris Fishbein, head of the AMA at the time, allegedly attempted to buy out Rife's technology. When Rife refused, a systematic campaign began to discredit his work. Laboratory equipment was mysteriously destroyed, research papers vanished, and colleagues who supported Rife found their funding cut off. Dr. Milbank Johnson, who had overseen the cancer trials, died under suspicious circumstances just hours before he was scheduled to announce the results publicly. By the 1950s, Rife's technology had been effectively erased from mainstream medicine. The frequencies that could supposedly cure humanity's deadliest diseases were buried beneath decades of regulatory pressure and professional ostracism. Modern Rife practitioners claim the original frequency lists still exist, passed down through underground networks of alternative healers who continue the work in secret. Mapimi, also known as the Mapimi Silent Zone, sits in the desert borderlands where 3 Mexican states meet. This remote stretch of the Chihuahuan Desert spans roughly 50 kilometers across parts of Durango, Chihuahua, and Coahuila. The zone earned its name from claims that radio waves simply refuse to function properly within its boundaries. Local residents and visitors report that AM and FM radio signals cut out entirely, television reception becomes impossible, and even shortwave communications fail to penetrate the area. Some accounts suggest that compasses spin wildly, and cellular phones lose all connectivity. The electromagnetic anomalies supposedly extend beyond simple communication blackouts. Pilots flying over the region have reported instrument malfunctions, with navigation equipment providing erratic readings. Ground-based researchers claim that their electronic devices drain batteries at accelerated rates, sometimes going from full charge to dead within hours. UFO researchers point to numerous sightings within the silent zone dating back to the 1940s. Witnesses describe metallic craft performing impossible maneuvers above the desert floor, bright lights that appear and vanish without explanation, and alleged landing sites marked by burned vegetation in perfect circular patterns. The biological claims prove equally intriguing. Local flora supposedly grows to unusual sizes, with desert tortoises reaching dimensions far exceeding normal parameters, and cacti developing abnormal colorations. Some researchers have documented purple-tinted nopal cacti and oversized radio plants that seem to thrive despite the harsh desert conditions. A significant incident occurred in 1970 when an American missile went off course during a test flight and crashed directly into the heart of the silent zone. The subsequent cleanup operation involved teams of American and Mexican scientists who allegedly spent months scouring the crash site, collecting not just missile debris, but soil samples and local vegetation. Skeptics argue that the electromagnetic claims stem from natural iron ore, deposits beneath the surface that create localized magnetic interference. The Mexican government maintains that while the area contains higher than normal magnetite concentrations, the supernatural aspects remain unsubstantiated. The zone sits at roughly the same latitude as the Bermuda Triangle and the Pyramids of Giza, leading some theorists to propose that these locations form points along a global grid of electromagnetic anomalies. This entry refers to reports of an isolated community in the San Gabriel Valley of California where residents appear to genuinely believe they are living in the year 1962. According to leaked documents and witness testimonies from the late 2010s, this small town operates as if President Kennedy is still alive and the Cold War remains at its peak. Residents drive cars exclusively from 1962 or earlier, dress in period-appropriate clothing, and conduct their daily lives using only technology available during that era. The most unsettling aspect involves their complete rejection of any evidence suggesting otherwise. When presented with modern calendars, smartphones, or news about events after 1962, residents either cannot perceive these items or dismiss them as elaborate hoaxes created by communist infiltrators. Local businesses accept only pre-1963 currency, with shop owners claiming that newer bills are obvious counterfeits due to their different designs and security features. The town newspaper, which residents claim has been publishing continuously since 1948, only reports on events from the Kennedy administration and earlier periods. Several researchers who attempted to study the phenomenon reported experiencing severe disorientation after spending more than 6 hours in the town. Some described feeling as though they themselves were slipping back in time, with their modern clothing gradually appearing unfamiliar, and their memories of post-1962 events becoming increasingly hazy. The town allegedly maintains a population of approximately 400 residents, yet no official records of this community exist in any modern database. Satellite imagery of the supposed location shows only empty desert, leading some to suggest the entire settlement exists in a temporal bubble invisible to outside observation. Most concerning are reports that anyone who stays longer than 72 hours becomes permanently integrated into the community, losing all memory of life beyond 1962. This entry is known as the NSA Belange Kill List. The theory claims that a classified document titled The Belange List was created by the National Security Agency as an internal database of individuals flagged for surveillance, neutralization, or long-term containment. Unlike ordinary watch lists, the Belange List allegedly includes people not for what they've done, but for what they might become. Future whistleblowers, disruptors, or influential thinkers considered threats to centralized control. According to leaked fragments that circulated online in the early 2000s, the list is generated through predictive algorithms. These systems scan decades of metadata, search history, phone calls, facial recognition patterns, social connections, and even psychological profiles created from social media behavior. Some say the algorithm doesn't just track, it forecasts intent. The term Belange has unclear origins. Some believe it refers to a defunct military contractor tied to early behavioral prediction systems. Others think it's a backronym for an internal NSA project. No official record of it exists, but alleged whistleblowers have linked it to post-Patriot Act expansions of the NSA's legal authority. One of the most well-known claims connected to the Belange theory involves a data scientist named Marcus Keller, who reportedly vanished after contacting journalists with encrypted messages about a self-learning surveillance protocol. Keller's name later appeared on obscure forums alongside others marked as Level 2 Belange Class. No one was able to confirm if the list was real, but several people from that thread were reported missing or involved in sudden accidents over the next 2 to 3 years. The most unsettling part is the suggestion that being on the list doesn't guarantee action, just monitoring. But once a certain behavioral threshold is crossed, intervention becomes automated. Whether that means being discredited, blacklisted, or quietly removed is said to depend on a tiered threat score only the system itself understands. To some, the Belange kill list is digital folklore. To others, it's a chilling blueprint for predictive suppression, using future crimes that never happened to justify outcomes that already have. Bog bodies as super disease hosts reveals one of the most chilling theories connecting ancient preservation with modern warfare. These naturally mummified remains, discovered in peat bogs across northern Europe, have maintained their tissue integrity for thousands of years thanks to the bog's unique acidic and oxygen-free environment. The conspiracy centers on government facilities, quietly collecting these bog bodies under the guise of archaeological research. The theory claims that scientists have discovered these ancient corpses harbor dormant pathogens and viruses that predate any modern immunity. Unlike typical mummies, bog bodies retain soft tissue, internal organs, and most importantly, according to this theory, their original bacterial and viral loads. The Tolland man from Denmark, discovered in 1950, still had identifiable stomach contents from his final meal. Grauballemann showed preserved fingerprints detailed enough for modern analysis. What makes this theory particularly unsettling is the scientific reality that peat bogs can preserve organic material in ways that keep ancient microorganisms viable. The acidic, low-oxygen environment essentially creates natural biological time capsules. The conspiracy suggests that military research divisions have been studying tissue samples from bog bodies like Lindoman and the Wide Girl, attempting to cultivate these ancient pathogens. The idea revolves around weaponizing diseases that modern populations would have zero natural resistance against. Supporters of this theory point to the restricted access around major bog body discoveries and the involvement of government-funded research teams who limit public information about their findings. They claim that what we see in museums are replicas, while the actual bodies undergo classified biological analysis. The theory extends to suggest that certain bog bodies, particularly those showing signs of violent death, may have been plague victims whose preserved remains now serve as reservoirs for forgotten epidemic diseases that could devastate modern populations. Fallujah birth defects refers to the dramatic increase in congenital abnormalities and childhood cancers reported in the Iraqi city of Fallujah following major military operations in 2004. After the intense battles for control of the city, local doctors began documenting alarming patterns in newborns. Birth defects increased by more than 600% compared to pre-war levels. These included severe neural tube defects, missing limbs, extra limbs, and facial deformities that medical professionals had rarely encountered. The timing coincided with the use of depleted uranium munitions and white phosphorus during the sieges. Depleted uranium is a byproduct of nuclear fuel processing that becomes aerosolized when fired, creating microscopic particles that can be inhaled or ingested. White phosphorus burns at over 800 degrees Celsius and produces toxic smoke. Dr. Samira Alani, a pediatrician at Fallujah General Hospital, documented hundreds of cases between 2007 and 2010. Her record showed that 14.7% of all births had some form of defect, compared to a global average of 2 to 3%. Hair samples from affected families tested positive for lead, mercury, and uranium at levels far exceeding safe limits. Similar patterns emerged in areas where depleted uranium had been used during the Balkans conflicts of the 1990s. Despite multiple requests from Iraqi health officials and international researchers, no comprehensive environmental assessment was conducted by coalition forces. Military spokespeople consistently denied any connection between weapons used and health impacts. The World Health Organization initially planned a comprehensive study, but faced significant delays and funding issues. Independent research efforts were often blocked or faced bureaucratic obstacles when trying to access the affected areas for systematic data collection. This entry suggests that time as we know it began not with the Big Bang, but with the detonation of the first atomic bomb during the Trinity test in New Mexico on July 7, 1945, July 16, 1945. The theory centers around the idea that nuclear fission represents such a fundamental break with natural processes that it created a new timeline entirely. Before 5:29 a.m. Mountain War time on that July morning, humanity existed in what believers call pre-atomic time, a fundamentally different temporal reality. The Trinity test released energy equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT in a fraction of a second, splitting atoms in a way that had never occurred naturally on Earth's surface. This moment, according to the theory, didn't just change human history, but literally rewrote the fabric of time itself. J. Robert Oppenheimer's famous quote about becoming destroyer of worlds takes on new meaning here. Some versions of this theory point to his later statements about feeling like the test had opened a door that could never be closed, as if he sensed the temporal shift occurring. The theory draws support from the strange synchronicities that followed. Within months, reports of unidentified flying objects began appearing worldwide. The Roswell incident occurred just 2 years later. Nuclear testing seemed to coincide with increased paranormal activity, as if the atomic age had torn holes in reality itself. Believers point to how time seemed to accelerate after 1945. Technological advancement that previously took decades now happened in years. Social changes that might have evolved over centuries compressed into decades. The pace of human civilization fundamentally shifted. The most compelling aspect involves what theorists call atomic amnesia, the idea that our pre-1945 memories are actually implanted from a previous timeline. This explains why historical records from before the atomic age sometimes contain inconsistencies or feel strangely distant, even for events that should be well documented. Devil's Tower root system suggests that the iconic geological formation in Wyoming is not what mainstream science claims it to be. Instead of being an ancient volcanic neck formed 65 million years ago, this theory proposes that Devil's Tower is actually the petrified remains of a colossal tree stump. The formation rises 867 feet above the surrounding landscape, with distinctive vertical columns that create an almost unnaturally geometric appearance. These columns, which geologists attribute to cooling magma, allegedly show the internal structure of what was once a massive tree trunk. Supporters of this idea point to the tower's flat top and cylindrical shape as evidence of artificial cutting. They argue that ancient civilizations possessed technology capable of felling trees thousands of feet tall, leaving behind these stone stumps as proof of their existence. The theory extends beyond Devil's Tower to include similar formations worldwide. Shiprock in New Mexico, the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, and various mesas throughout the American Southwest are all cited as additional examples of these ancient tree remains. Some versions of this theory connect to stories of biblical giants or advanced prehistoric civilizations that lived among forests of impossibly large trees. The petrification process allegedly occurred during a great cataclysm that turned organic matter to stone almost instantaneously. Geological surveys have identified Devil's Tower as composed of phonolite porphyry, formed when magma cooled and contracted underground before being exposed through erosion. The hexagonal column formations result from this specific cooling process, creating natural joints that split the rock in predictable patterns. Native American tribes, including the Lakota, have traditional stories about the tower's formation, typically involving bears clawing at the rock face while chasing people who had taken refuge on top. The tree stump theory gained significant traction on social media platforms in the 2010s, with side-by-side comparisons of Devil's Tower and actual tree stumps highlighting their structural similarities. This entry refers to the Manson family pit. According to this theory, a hidden underground chamber exists on the outskirts of the old Spahn Ranch property, the former home base of Charles Manson and his followers during the late 1960s. Referred to by some researchers as the pit, this alleged site is said to have been used not only for secret gatherings, but for rituals, coercive control, and, in more extreme versions of the story, psychological programming experiments. The concept hinges on reports from law enforcement and private investigators who explored the area after the arrests. Some claim to have found partially collapsed tunnels and man-made voids beneath the property. These discoveries were dismissed as storm drains or natural erosion. But years later, aerial scans and ground-penetrating radar conducted by independent researchers appeared to show a large, symmetrical depression beneath a remote section of the ranch. What makes the theory stick is how often the pit appears in first-hand accounts from surviving members, but only vaguely. In one recorded interview from the early 1980s, a former follower mentioned a buried room where the group would gather to hear messages from below. Others have referenced a space used for alignment or conditioning, though no exact location was ever confirmed. The strangest layer of the theory links the pit to fringe rumors that Manson was not entirely acting alone. According to these claims, he had connections to experimental behavior programs dating back to the early 1960s, some even involving unauthorized field tests of sensory deprivation and belief manipulation. The pit, in this context, was not symbolic. It was a literal chamber used to break people down and rewire them. To this day, no verified excavation has turned up anything. The land changed ownership several times, and modern construction may have wiped out whatever was there. But among conspiracy theorists, the Manson family pit remains a dark node in a much larger network, where cults, mind control, and buried evidence intersect just beneath the surface. This entry refers to the theory that the Axis powers secretly won World War II. On the surface, history records the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany in 1945 and Imperial Japan shortly after. But this theory suggests that while the Allies won the war publicly, the real victory went to remnants of Axis ideology that embedded themselves into post-war systems, especially in the United States and South America. The most well-known foundation for this idea is Operation Paperclip, a real program that brought over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and intelligence officers to the United States after the war. These included individuals with direct ties to war crimes and Nazi research. Wernher von Braun, for example, went from designing weapons for Hitler to building the rockets that took America to the moon. The theory argues this wasn't just recruitment, it was a quiet transfer of power, allowing German intelligence networks to survive and influence the modern world. South America plays a major role too. Hundreds of former SS officers, including high-ranking names like Joseph Mengele and Klaus Barbie, evaded capture and lived freely for decades in Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Entire German-speaking colonies emerged in remote areas with tightly guarded compounds and minimal outside contact. Some claim these weren't just hiding spots. They were fallback zones for a larger global agenda. In this view, World War II didn't end with surrender. It ended with a restructuring. Nazi strategies of surveillance, psychological warfare, and propaganda weren't defeated. They were absorbed. The rise of global intelligence agencies, biometric tracking, and controlled media narratives are all said to reflect this hidden continuity. Even the post-war economic order is part of the theory. The formation of powerful international institutions, paired with the United States dollar becoming the global standard, is seen not as liberation, but consolidation. A soft victory, masked as peace. Of course, none of this requires overt Nazi flags or uniforms. The theory claims victory came through influence, not occupation. A victory not of nations, but of ideas that were never fully erased. Ideas that adapted, survived, and quietly won. This entry explores the claim that modern medicine deliberately conceals the existence of 6 specific human organs from the general public. According to this theory, these hidden organs serve crucial functions that would revolutionize our understanding of human biology and health. The supposed cover-up stems from pharmaceutical companies and medical institutions wanting to maintain control over treatment methods and profit margins. The first alleged organ is described as a secondary heart located near the liver. Believers claim this organ regulates emotional responses and stress hormones in ways that could eliminate the need for anxiety medications if properly understood. The second is supposedly a filtration system in the upper abdomen that processes toxins more efficiently than the kidneys. Proponents suggest that acknowledging this organ would undermine the entire detox industry and certain medical procedures. The third claimed organ involves specialized tissue behind the sternum that allegedly produces stem cells throughout adult life. This discovery would supposedly revolutionize regenerative medicine and make many current treatments obsolete. The fourth centers on a network of microscopic organs in the brain that supposedly regulate consciousness and memory formation. These are said to be deliberately ignored because understanding them would challenge psychiatric treatment protocols. The fifth involves what believers call a secondary immune system located in the spine that activates during extreme stress. Knowledge of this system would allegedly transform emergency medicine and trauma treatment. The final organ is described as a hormonal regulator in the neck region that controls aging processes. Believers claim pharmaceutical companies suppress this information to protect anti-aging product markets. Medical professionals universally reject these claims, pointing to extensive anatomical research and modern imaging technology that would make hiding entire organ systems impossible. The theory persists among those who distrust mainstream medical institutions and believe in systematic suppression of alternative health knowledge. Venusian health magic emerged from the mind of Michael X. Barton, a Los Angeles businessman whose life changed dramatically when his best friend fell gravely ill in the 1950s. While desperately seeking answers through meditation, Barton claimed he began receiving telepathic transmissions from advanced beings residing on a higher vibrational plane of Venus, invisible to our scientific instruments. These self-proclaimed space brothers delivered a startling message. No human on Earth needed to suffer from sickness, pain, or despair if they followed the health principles being transmitted from Venus. The beings revealed they had mastered what they called life electricity, the fundamental energy that powers the human body. According to their teachings, radiant health could be achieved by increasing one's intake of this life electricity through specific diets and conscious direction of lifetrons. The Venusian secret science, as Barton termed it, allegedly represented 33 million years of development by thousands of human minds working under the guidance of beings called the Lord Thinkers. The system centered on 3 foundational principles: life, love, and light. Barton transcribed 14 detailed lessons covering everything from two-way thought communication and mental radio techniques to vitality elixirs and pyramid healing principles. The courses promised to teach students how to overcome bad environments, improve lifetronic energy quality, and cross the 3 rivers of life to achieve perfect health. The Space Brothers claimed their timing was no coincidence. Humanity had reached the perfect moment to receive this cosmic knowledge and participate in what they called the Grand Awakening. Barton published these teachings through self-distributed courses and books, carefully using a pseudonym to protect his business reputation while spreading what he believed were revolutionary health secrets from another world. The system gained a devoted following within UFO contactee circles and New Age communities, with believers claiming remarkable healing results from applying these otherworldly principles to their daily lives. XRA psyops refers to the conspiracy theory that Xavier Renegade Angel, the bizarre Adult Swim animated series from the late 2000s, was actually a government psychological operation designed to manipulate viewers. The show itself featured a strange CGI creature wandering through surreal landscapes, delivering nonsensical philosophical monologues in a distinctly unsettling voice. Its deliberately crude animation style and abstract storytelling made it one of the most polarizing programs on late-night television. But according to this conspiracy theory, the show's bizarre nature wasn't accidental artistic choice. Conspiracy theorists claim the series contained hidden subliminal messaging embedded within both its audio tracks and visual sequences. They point to specific imagery throughout the show as evidence of a deeper agenda, including scenes involving strange rituals, occult symbolism, and disturbing transformations. The theory gained traction on paranormal discussion boards, where users analyzed individual episodes frame by frame, searching for hidden meanings. The timing of the show's resurgence in internet culture during the 2010s raised additional suspicions among believers. As XRA became a meme on various image boards and social media platforms, some interpreted this renewed interest as part of a coordinated effort to reintroduce the alleged programming to a new generation. Proponents of this theory argue that the show's placement on a network known for experimental content provided perfect cover for such an operation. They suggest that the deliberately confusing narrative and grotesque visual style were specifically designed to bypass conscious critical thinking while implanting subconscious suggestions. The conspiracy connects to broader beliefs about media manipulation and the use of entertainment as a vehicle for social engineering, reflecting growing suspicions about hidden agendas within popular culture during the era of increased distrust in institutions. Bermuda Triangle resurfacings take the classic disappearance stories one step further, by claiming that some of the missing vessels and aircraft don't just vanish forever. Instead, they allegedly reappear days, months, or even years later in completely different locations, often thousands of kilometers away from where they originally disappeared. The most cited case involves Flight 914, a passenger aircraft that supposedly disappeared over the Triangle in 1955, only to land at Caracas Airport in Venezuela 37 years later in 1992. According to the story, the plane appeared on radar suddenly, landed normally, and the passengers and crew had no awareness that any time had passed. When air traffic control informed the pilot of the date, he allegedly took off immediately and disappeared again. Another frequently mentioned incident involves the merchant vessel MV Joyita, which vanished in 1955 with 25 people aboard. 5 weeks later, the partially submerged wreckage was found over 600 kilometers from its planned route, with all passengers and crew missing, but no signs of violence or struggle. The cargo hold was empty despite being loaded with supplies, and the ship's logbooks had vanished. These resurfacing accounts often share common elements that make them particularly intriguing to researchers. The recovered vessels frequently show minimal wear despite being missing for extended periods, as if time itself had slowed down or stopped entirely. Fuel tanks remain nearly full, food supplies appear fresh, and mechanical systems function normally despite exposure to ocean conditions. Some versions of these stories include crew members who return with gaps in their memory, claiming they experienced only minutes or hours during disappearances that lasted weeks or months in real time. The psychological evaluations of these individuals allegedly show no signs of deception, though they struggle to account for the missing time periods. What makes these cases particularly puzzling to investigators is the geographic impossibility of the discoveries. Ships found on opposite sides of the Atlantic with insufficient fuel to make such journeys, or aircraft discovered on remote islands with no suitable landing strips nearby. Scutoids represent one of the most recently acknowledged geometric forms in nature, officially discovered in 2018 by Spanish researchers studying how cells arrange themselves in living tissue. What makes this discovery particularly intriguing is that scientists claim this fundamental shape had somehow escaped mathematical classification for centuries, despite being present in virtually every multicellular organism on Earth. The scutoid resembles a twisted prism with different numbers of sides on its top and bottom faces. Think of a geometric shape that starts as a pentagon on one end but transforms into a hexagon on the other, connected by a complex curved surface that includes additional triangular faces. Researchers at the University of Seville found these shapes when examining how epithelial cells pack together in curved tissues like blood vessels and organ surfaces. The cells needed to maintain tight connections while accommodating the three-dimensional curves of living structures. The timing of this discovery raises eyebrows among certain circles. Some point out that ancient architectural sites display remarkably similar geometric patterns, particularly in Mesopotamian and pre-Columbian structures. The Ishtar Gate of Babylon features tile arrangements that mirror scutoid packing principles, despite predating the official discovery by over 2,000 years. More curious still is the shape's name itself. Scientists chose scutoid after the scutellum, a small triangular section found on beetlebacks. Critics note this naming convention seems oddly specific for a supposedly brand new geometric discovery. Advanced computer modeling suggests scutoids optimize space efficiency in ways that surpass traditional geometric forms. Some researchers quietly speculate that understanding scutoid mathematics could revolutionize everything from materials engineering to architectural design. The question lingers whether this fundamental building block of life was truly unknown to previous civilizations, or whether certain knowledge simply waited for the right moment to resurface in academic literature. The perestroika deception claims that the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 was the greatest con job in modern history. According to this theory, Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms and the dramatic fall of the Berlin Wall were elaborate theater designed to trick the West into lowering its guard. The conspiracy centers on warnings from Anatoly Golitsyn, a high-ranking KGB defector who fled to the United States in 1961. Golitsyn insisted that Soviet leadership had developed a long-term strategy to fake liberalization, while secretly maintaining communist control structures. He predicted that the Soviets would stage a false collapse, complete with the appearance of democratic movements and economic reforms. Believers point to suspicious timing throughout the supposed collapse. The Berlin Wall fell with remarkably little bloodshed for such a momentous event. Soviet satellite states gained independence almost overnight with minimal resistance from Moscow. Hardline communist leaders seemed to vanish into thin air rather than fight to preserve their power. The theory suggests this fake collapse served multiple purposes. Western nations dramatically reduced military spending and intelligence operations. NATO expansion, rather than being seen as victory, was actually part of the plan to stretch Western resources thin. Meanwhile, former KGB operatives allegedly infiltrated governments, media organizations, and financial institutions across Europe and America. Proponents highlight how former Soviet republics maintained close ties with Moscow despite supposed independence. They note that many post-Soviet leaders had extensive backgrounds in Communist Party structures. The rapid rise of oligarchs who consolidated control over key industries seems too coordinated to be coincidental. The deception theory attempts to explain modern geopolitical tensions as the final phase of this decades-long operation. Rather than a new Cold War emerging, believers argue we're witnessing the original Cold War's planned conclusion, with the West finally realizing it was systematically infiltrated and weakened from within. Stanley Kubrick God-enslavement refers to the belief that the legendary filmmaker embedded coded messages throughout his movies, revealing humanity's spiritual enslavement by higher dimensional beings. This theory centers on Kubrick's alleged use of specific visual symbols, geometric patterns, and numerical sequences that supposedly decode into warnings about interdimensional control systems. Believers point to recurring imagery across films like 2001, A Space Odyssey, The Shining, and Eyes Wide Shut as evidence of this hidden communication. The monolith in 2001 gets particular attention, with theorists claiming its proportions match ancient sacred geometry ratios that appear in religious architecture worldwide. They argue Kubrick was showing how these beings use mathematical frequencies to maintain psychological control over human consciousness. In The Shining, the hexagonal carpet patterns in the Colorado Lounge allegedly represent interdimensional portals, while the number 237 appearing throughout the film supposedly corresponds to specific biblical passages about false gods and spiritual deception. Eyes Wide Shut receives the most scrutiny, with its masked ritual scenes interpreted as Kubrick's final attempt to expose real occult practices used by elite groups to maintain this spiritual control system. The rainbow symbolism throughout the film is said to reference electromagnetic spectrum manipulation of human perception. Supporters claim Kubrick spent decades researching esoteric texts and communicating with insiders before his death in 1999, just days after completing Eyes Wide Shut's final cut. They believe he used his reputation as a perfectionist to hide these messages in plain sight, knowing audiences would dismiss them as artistic choices rather than deliberate warnings about humanity's cosmic predicament. The theory suggests these beings feed off human emotional energy, particularly fear and worship, maintaining control through religious institutions and media programming that Kubrick attempted to expose through his cinematic language. The color red causes cancer is a fringe theory that claims exposure to the color red, whether through light wavelengths or pigmented materials, triggers cellular mutations leading to malignant growths. Believers in this theory point to the 650 nanometer wavelength of red light as particularly dangerous, claiming it penetrates deeper into human tissue than other visible spectrum colors. They argue that prolonged exposure to red environments, red clothing, or even red food coloring creates a cumulative toxic effect that conventional medicine refuses to acknowledge. The theory gained traction in online communities during the 2010s, when several individuals reported developing skin conditions after working in photography darkrooms with red safety lights. These cases, though lacking peer review, became foundational evidence for believers who connected them to broader patterns they observed. Some versions of this theory extend beyond light wavelengths to include red pigments and dyes. Proponents claim that cinnabar, a naturally occurring red mineral containing mercury, was historically used in paints and cosmetics, causing illness in those who handled it regularly. They extrapolate this historical precedent to suggest that all red colorants carry similar risks, regardless of their chemical composition. The theory also incorporates claims about suppressed research from the 1970s, allegedly showing correlations between red light exposure and cellular damage. Believers cite unnamed studies that were supposedly buried by paint manufacturers and lighting companies to protect their industries. More extreme versions suggest that red stop signs, traffic lights, and emergency vehicle lighting create cancer clusters in urban areas through constant low-level exposure. They point to statistical anomalies in cancer rates near major intersections, though these correlations ignore numerous other environmental factors present in busy urban zones. Self-inducing schizophrenia refers to the controversial claim that certain techniques can deliberately trigger schizophrenic episodes or symptoms in otherwise healthy individuals. The theory centers around documented cases from the 1950s and 60s where researchers allegedly discovered specific combinations of sensory deprivation, isolation, and pharmaceutical compounds that could produce temporary psychotic breaks. These experiments supposedly revealed that the human mind possesses built-in vulnerabilities that can be exploited through precise environmental manipulation. Schizophrenia typically involves hallucinations, delusions, and disrupted thought patterns that develop naturally due to genetic and environmental factors. However, this conspiracy suggests that understanding these mechanisms allows for artificial replication of the condition. The most cited case involves Donald Hebb's sensory deprivation experiments at McGill University, where volunteers experienced hallucinations and paranoid thoughts after just hours of isolation with minimal sensory input. Some researchers allegedly pushed these techniques further, combining them with specific drug cocktails and psychological pressure techniques. Military documents from the Cold War era supposedly reference projects aimed at creating temporary psychological breaks in enemy agents during interrogation. These files allegedly describe protocols involving sleep deprivation lasting 7 to 10 days, combined with specific light frequencies and auditory bombardment. The theory extends to claims about certain meditation practices and consciousness exploration techniques that can accidentally trigger similar effects. Underground communities allegedly share specific breathing patterns, fasting schedules, and mental exercises that can induce temporary breaks from reality. Modern variations of this theory point to social media algorithms and digital manipulation techniques that supposedly exploit similar psychological vulnerabilities on a mass scale, creating artificial paranoia and disconnection from reality in targeted populations. This entry suggests that the infamous energy company Enron never actually disappeared after its spectacular collapse in 2001, but instead evolved into a shadow organization that now secretly controls artificial intelligence trading algorithms across global financial markets. The theory begins with the observation that several former Enron executives and quantitative analysts quietly resurfaced at major tech companies and trading firms throughout the 2010s. Jeffrey Skilling's early release from prison in 2019 coincided suspiciously with a surge in unexplained algorithmic trading patterns that mirror Enron's old energy market manipulation tactics. Believers point to the fact that Enron was already pioneering automated trading systems and complex financial derivatives decades before AI became mainstream. They argue the company's real innovation wasn't just cooking books, but developing predictive algorithms that could manipulate entire market sectors. When the company officially dissolved, this technology supposedly went underground. The most compelling evidence cited involves trading anomalies in energy futures markets that follow patterns identical to Enron's historical manipulation strategies, but executed at superhuman speeds only possible through machine learning. These trades allegedly originate from shell companies traced back to former Enron subsidiaries that technically still exist in offshore jurisdictions. Specific names mentioned include Rebecca Mark and Lou Pai, former Enron executives who supposedly maintain connections to firms like Renaissance Technologies and 2 Sigma, major players in algorithmic trading. The theory suggests these connections allow Enron's ghost to influence everything from cryptocurrency markets to renewable energy trading platforms. The ultimate claim is that Enron's collapse was actually a carefully orchestrated exit strategy, allowing them to shed regulatory oversight while repositioning for the AI revolution they saw coming 20 years early. The Evangelion Collection 0:7. Australian DVD Easter egg refers to one of the most bizarre mastering errors in anime distribution history. In the mid-2000s, Australian anime distributor Madman Entertainment released Neon Genesis Evangelion Collection 0:7, containing episodes 21 through 23. Everything seemed normal until fans discovered something deeply unsettling hidden in the DVD menus. When accessing the Magi Files character profiles and leaving the menu idle on Shigeru Aoba's biography, viewers would witness something completely unrelated to giant robots or psychological horror. After approximately 12 seconds, a brief video clip of an adult film actress would suddenly appear on screen before vanishing just as quickly. The discovery first surfaced when Reddit user Super Honda Nut posted about their copy purchased from a Sydney store. What made this particularly eerie was how other Australian fans began reporting identical experiences with their own copies. The clip featured Grace Quek, professionally known as Annabelle Chong, a Singaporean-American performer who had retired from adult films years earlier. Initially, fans debated whether this was an intentional hidden message, some kind of elaborate prank, or evidence of bootleg manufacturing. The timing felt too precise to be random, appearing consistently at the same menu location across multiple copies. Some theorized it was connected to Evangelion's notorious psychological themes, or even a commentary on the series' controversial hospital scene. The truth proved far more mundane, yet equally disturbing. Madman Entertainment had been authoring multiple projects simultaneously, including a documentary about Chong's life and career transition. During the DVD mastering process, footage from that documentary was accidentally inserted into Evangelion's menu programming. What transforms this simple mistake into conspiracy territory is the surgical precision of the error. The clip appeared only on Ioba's specific character profile, only after exactly 12 seconds, and only on Australian copies. For a supposedly random authoring mistake, the consistency across multiple production runs suggests either extraordinary coincidence or something more deliberately programmed into the master files. The incident highlights how easily foreign content can infiltrate beloved media through distribution chains, leaving fans to question what other alterations might exist in their collections. This entry is known as Never Open Exist. The theory centers on a series of files, folders, and digital artifacts that appear in obscure corners of the internet, usually titled with phrases like neveropen.exe. These files are not part of any official software or known malware catalog. Instead, they're said to appear spontaneously, shared through peer-to-peer networks, encrypted torrents, or old hard drives bought at auctions. Opening the file is where things get strange. Witness reports vary, but many describe the same pattern. The file appears empty at first, then spawns a cascade of windows filled with nonsensical code, distorted audio, or glitched-out imagery. In some cases, it allegedly causes hardware to behave unpredictably. Monitors flickering, hard drives spinning erratically, or even microphones turning on unprompted. One user claimed their keyboard began typing by itself after running it. The deeper layer of the theory links never open, exist to a kind of digital curse. According to this idea, the file isn't just corrupted data. It's an intentional payload designed to awaken or tag those who interact with it. Some believe it serves as a digital trigger tied to remote viewing programs or artificial entities lurking on unindexed networks. The file often includes fragmented text strings like, "We are you," "Don't look for us," and "Exist in the blind spot." These are interpreted as warnings or identifiers. Several cases claim that users who accessed the file later experienced persistent oddities, electronics turning on at night, subtle alterations to digital photos, or messages appearing in auto-suggestions and predictive text that reference things they never typed. A notable case emerged in the late 2010s when a Reddit user claimed to have recovered Never Open Exist from a discarded laptop previously owned by a software engineer connected to a now defunct contractor for the Department of Defense. Within days of posting screenshots, the user's account was deleted, and archived copies of the thread were pulled from multiple web mirrors without explanation. Those who believe in the theory say the file is a kind of seed, not a virus, but an idea that spreads through curiosity. By choosing to open it, you become the end point. You complete the circuit. And from that point on, you're part of whatever made it. The madness of the Anabaptists at Münster refers to one of history's most bizarre religious takeovers that unfolded in the German city of Münster during 1534 and 1535. The Anabaptists were a radical Protestant sect who believed in adult baptism and refused to recognize any earthly authority above God. When a charismatic preacher named Bernhard Rothman converted the city's population, things escalated beyond anyone's expectations. In February 1534, thousands of Anabaptists flooded into Münster, overwhelming the local government and declaring the city a New Jerusalem. Their leader, Jan Mathis, proclaimed that God had personally chosen Münster as the site for Christ's return to earth. What happened next reads like a fever dream. Mathis ordered all non-believers to convert or face exile, essentially creating the first modern religious ethnostate. Books were burned in massive bonfires, with only the Bible permitted to remain. When Mathis died during a failed military sortie, an even more extreme leader emerged. Jan van Leyden, a 25-year-old former tailor, declared himself the new King David and instituted a series of increasingly unhinged policies. Van Leyden legalized polygamy, claiming divine revelation commanded it. He himself took 16 wives, including the widow of his predecessor. The city's resources were redistributed according to his interpretation of communist Christianity, with private property abolished overnight. Meanwhile, Catholic and Lutheran armies surrounded Münster, beginning a brutal siege that lasted over a year. Inside the walls, Van Leyden's regime grew more authoritarian by the day, executing anyone who questioned his divine authority. The conspiracy elements emerge from how thoroughly this episode was scrubbed from mainstream Protestant histories. Many religious scholars argue that the Münster incident was deliberately buried because it demonstrated the dangerous potential of radical Reformation thinking. Contemporary accounts describe mass hysteria, public executions staged as religious theater, and claims that Van Leyden performed miraculous healings. The line between religious fervor and collective madness became completely blurred. When the city finally fell in June 1535, the three main leaders were tortured to death, and their bodies displayed in iron cages that hung from a church tower for decades as a warning. Surplus value of code refers to a Marxist economic analysis applied to the modern software industry, claiming that programmers are systematically underpaid relative to the enormous wealth their code generates. The theory builds on Karl Marx's concept of surplus value, which describes the difference between what workers produce and what they receive in wages. In traditional manufacturing, a factory worker might create $10 worth of goods, but only receive $3 in pay, with the remaining $7 becoming profit for the company owner. Software development amplifies this dynamic to an almost absurd degree. A single programmer working for 6 months might write code that generates millions in revenue for decades. Consider that Facebook was built primarily by Mark Zuckerberg and a small team of early developers, yet the platform now generates over $100 billion annually. The original programmers who built the core systems received salaries, but the ongoing value extraction from their code continues indefinitely. The conspiracy aspect centers on how tech companies deliberately obscure this relationship. Stock options and equity packages create an illusion of shared ownership, but these typically represent tiny fractions of the actual value created. Meanwhile, companies like Google and Apple maintain profit margins that would make oil companies jealous, built entirely on the accumulated labor of their engineering teams. Proponents point to the rise of open-source software as evidence of this exploitation. Developers often contribute valuable code for free to projects that corporations then monetize extensively. The Linux operating system, created through volunteer labor, now powers most of the internet's infrastructure, generating trillions in economic activity while its creators received nothing. The theory suggests that big tech deliberately promotes the mythology of individual genius and entrepreneurship to mask what is essentially a highly efficient system of labor value extraction, where the means of production have shifted from factories to keyboards, but the fundamental relationship between worker and owner remains unchanged. This entry claims that a sophisticated global communication network existed throughout the 1800s, decades before the official invention of the Internet. The theory centers on the extensive telegraph infrastructure that rapidly expanded across continents during this period. By 1860, telegraph cables stretched from New York to London, and by 1870, networks connected Europe to India and Australia. What makes this compelling is the sheer speed of information transfer that these systems achieved. Telegraph operators developed abbreviated codes and shorthand that allowed complex messages to travel thousands of miles in minutes. Stock prices, news, and even personal communications moved between continents faster than any previous point in human history. The theory suggests this network was far more sophisticated than official records indicate. Specific cases fuel this belief. The 1866 Atlantic cable allowed Queen Victoria to send a 99-word congratulatory message to President James Buchanan in just 16 hours. Financial markets in London and New York began synchronizing almost instantly. Some claim that wealthy families like the Rothschilds used private telegraph networks to coordinate business decisions across their global empire with remarkable precision. The most intriguing aspect involves the technical capabilities that supposedly existed. Operators could reportedly send multiple messages simultaneously on single wires using different frequencies. Some systems allegedly transmitted not just text, but crude images and even early forms of what we might recognize as file transfers. Critics of official history point to the mysterious destruction of many telegraph company records from this era. They argue that evidence of these advanced capabilities was deliberately obscured to make the 20th century internet appear more revolutionary than it actually was. The theory suggests that what we call the internet today is simply a wireless version of communication networks that global elites had been using for over a century. This entry concerns the Blair Witch 2 Lost ARG, a promotional alternate reality game that vanished from the internet shortly after the sequel's release in 2000. Alternate reality games blur the line between fiction and reality by spreading clues across websites, phone numbers, and real-world locations. Players work together to solve puzzles and uncover hidden narratives that extend beyond the main story. Artisan Entertainment reportedly commissioned an extensive ARG to promote Book of Shadows, building on the viral marketing success of the original Blair Witch Project. The campaign launched 3 months before the film's October release, featuring a network of interconnected websites, fake news reports, and mysterious phone recordings. Players discovered references to the Rustin Parr Historical Society, a fictional organization that maintained detailed archives about Burkittsville's dark history. The Society's website contained seemingly authentic documents, including psychiatric evaluations and police reports dating back to the 1940s. The ARG's central mystery involved 7 additional tapes that never appeared in either Blair Witch film. These recordings allegedly contained footage shot by different groups who visited the woods between 1999 and 2000. Players could access fragments through a complex series of puzzles that required decoding Latin phrases and solving mathematical sequences. Everything disappeared within weeks of the movie's poor reception. Domain registrations expired, phone numbers went dead, and archived versions of the websites showed only placeholder text. Former Artisan employees who worked on the campaign signed unusually strict non-disclosure agreements that remain in effect today. Some players managed to save portions of the content before it vanished. These fragments mention something called the Coffin Rock Incident, and reference coordinates that point to an actual location in Maryland's Black Hills Forest. The saved materials also include what appears to be genuine police radio chatter from October 1994, describing the discovery of unidentified evidence near Coffin Rock. Synchronicity following refers to the practice of actively seeking and interpreting meaningful coincidences as proof of quantum jumping between parallel realities. This theory combines Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity with quantum mechanics interpretations, claiming that repeated patterns of coincidences indicate successful shifts between alternate timelines. Practitioners believe they can deliberately trigger these reality jumps through specific mental techniques and ritual behaviors. The quantum jumping community emerged prominently in the 2010s through online forums and social media groups. Members document their experiences using detailed reality shift logs, recording changes in their personal timelines that supposedly occurred after performing jumping techniques. These logs often include alterations to celebrity deaths, movie quotes, geographic locations, and personal relationships that differ from their previous reality. Popular methods include the 2-cup technique, where practitioners write their current situation on one cup and desired reality on another, then drink water while visualizing the transition. Mirror gazing sessions lasting 20 to 30 minutes are claimed to open portals between dimensions. Some followers use binaural beats at specific frequencies, particularly 40 Hz, believing this synchronizes brainwaves with quantum field fluctuations. Notable cases within the community include reports of people waking up in realities where their deceased relatives are alive, finding themselves in different careers, or discovering that historical events unfolded differently. The Mandela effect phenomenon is often cited as mass evidence of collective quantum jumping, where groups of people remember alternate versions of reality. Advanced practitioners claim to detect reality shifts through synchronicity tracking apps and journals that monitor coincidence frequency rates. They interpret increased synchronicity as confirmation of successful dimensional transitions, creating feedback loops that reinforce their belief system and encourage continued jumping attempts. This entry refers to the theory that time and history are actually moving in reverse, despite our perception that we're progressing forward through the timeline. The core claim suggests that what we experience as the future is actually the past, and events we remember as historical are yet to come. Supporters point to the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy always increases over time. They argue that if entropy is truly always increasing, then we must be moving backwards through time, watching the universe become more organized rather than less. Several physicists have noted that most fundamental equations of physics work equally well in both directions of time. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation, which attempts to describe quantum gravity, contains no time parameter at all. This has led some researchers to question whether time has an inherent direction, or if our perception creates the illusion of forward movement. The theory gained attention in the 1970s when physicist Stephen Hawking proposed that in a contracting universe, time might reverse direction. More recently, cosmologist Sean Carroll has written extensively about the arrow of time problem, noting that our universe appears to have started in an unusually low entropy state. Believers cite historical patterns as evidence. They observe that technological advancement appears to follow predictable cycles, with similar innovations appearing across different civilizations that had no contact. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE mirrors societal breakdowns seen in later empires, suggesting history moves through predetermined reverse sequences. Some point to archaeological anomalies like the Antikythera mechanism, a Greek computer from the 1st century BCE that seems too advanced for its supposed time period. If history moves backward, such artifacts represent glimpses of our actual past that appears as our future. The implications would mean that free will is an illusion, that death precedes birth, and that learning is actually forgetting. Every conversation you've had was predetermined, every choice already made in what we mistakenly call tomorrow. This entry explores the theological conspiracy theory known as no heaven, only hell. This theory suggests that traditional religious teachings about a blissful afterlife are deliberate deceptions, and that the only post-mortem destination is a realm of eternal suffering. The concept challenges fundamental assumptions across multiple faith traditions by proposing that heaven either doesn't exist or serves as a false promise designed to control human behavior. The theory draws heavily from Gnostic traditions that viewed the material world itself as a prison created by a malevolent deity called the Demiurge. According to these ancient texts, what mainstream religions call God is actually a false creator who traps souls in cycles of reincarnation and suffering. The promised heaven becomes nothing more than another layer of this cosmic deception. Modern proponents point to the writings of theologian David Ray Griffin and philosopher Thomas Nagel, who question traditional concepts of divine justice and afterlife rewards. They argue that if an all-knowing deity permits infinite suffering on Earth, the logical conclusion is that suffering continues indefinitely beyond death. The theory gained traction in online forums during the 2010s, particularly among former religious adherents who cited personal revelations and near-death experiences that contradicted heavenly narratives. These accounts describe encounters with entities claiming to be angels or divine messengers, only to reveal themselves as deceptive beings perpetuating the illusion of salvation. Some versions of this theory incorporate quantum consciousness research, suggesting that consciousness cannot be destroyed, but becomes trapped in lower vibrational frequencies that manifest as hellish experiences. The promised transcendence to higher realms allegedly serves as bait to keep souls compliant during their earthly incarnations. The conspiracy extends to religious institutions themselves, which theorists claim knowingly perpetuate these false teachings to maintain social control and financial power. They point to the Vatican's vast wealth and the prosperity gospel movement as evidence that religious leaders benefit from selling hope they know to be false. This entry refers to alleged secret plans to construct a massive artificial inland ocean within the Sahara Desert. The theory claims that various world governments and international organizations have been quietly developing technology and infrastructure to flood portions of the desert, creating a body of water roughly the size of the Mediterranean Sea. Believers point to several suspicious activities across North Africa during the 2010s and 2020s. Satellite imagery allegedly shows unusual construction patterns in remote desert regions of Algeria and Libya, including what appear to be large-scale excavation projects and the installation of massive pipeline systems. These installations supposedly extend for hundreds of kilometers underground, connecting to both the Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean Sea. The conspiracy suggests this project serves multiple purposes beyond simple water management. The artificial ocean would dramatically alter regional weather patterns, potentially making the surrounding areas more habitable and agriculturally viable. However, theorists claim the real motivation involves resource extraction, as the flooding would provide cover for accessing previously unreachable mineral deposits and oil reserves beneath the desert floor. Specific companies mentioned in these theories include major engineering firms that have worked on large-scale water projects in the Middle East. Documents allegedly leaked from these organizations describe feasibility studies for Project Blue Sahara and reference advanced desalination technology capable of processing seawater at unprecedented scales. The timeline for completion supposedly extends into the 2030s, with the initial flooding phases already underway in isolated test areas. Conspiracy theorists claim that recent changes in regional precipitation patterns and the appearance of previously unknown water sources in certain desert communities serve as evidence that preliminary stages of the project are already affecting local hydrology. Critics of the theory argue that the engineering challenges and costs would make such a project economically impossible, though believers counter that the potential returns in terms of land development and resource access would justify the massive investment. Time is going faster suggests that our planet's temporal flow has genuinely accelerated, making days, weeks, and years pass more rapidly than they did decades ago. This theory points to the Schumann resonance, Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat that pulses at approximately 7.83 Hz. Researchers claim this frequency has been steadily increasing since the late 1990s, jumping from its historical baseline to measurements as high as 16 to 17 Hz during peak periods. The resonance acts like a metronome for biological processes, with human brainwaves naturally synchronizing to this planetary rhythm. When Earth's frequency accelerates, proponents argue that human consciousness speeds up accordingly, creating the sensation that time itself is moving faster. Scientific measurements show Earth's rotation has indeed fluctuated throughout history. In recent decades, our planet has been spinning slightly faster, shaving milliseconds off each day. While mainstream science attributes this to factors like melting ice caps and atmospheric changes, theorists suggest something more fundamental is occurring. Some versions of this theory tie the acceleration to solar activity and cosmic rays bombarding our planet with increasing intensity. Others point to the proliferation of electromagnetic technology since the 2000s, claiming that cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, and satellite communications are interfering with natural time perception. The most compelling evidence comes from widespread reports of the same phenomenon. People across different cultures and age groups describe feeling like childhood summers lasted forever, while recent years blur together in an indistinguishable rush. What once felt like a genuine hour now seems to pass in minutes. Biological research does show that time perception naturally accelerates with age, but adherents insist this recent acceleration affects even young people who should still experience time at a slower pace. The Tapwater Blacklist refers to alleged secret government databases cataloging which municipal water supplies contain deliberate chemical additives beyond standard treatment processes. According to this theory, federal agencies maintain classified lists ranking water systems by their levels of population control substances, with certain regions receiving higher concentrations based on political demographics or social compliance metrics. The conspiracy centers around claims that fluoride serves as more than dental protection. Theorists point to declassified documents from the 1940s showing that both Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia used fluoride compounds in concentration camps and gulags to increase docility among prisoners. They argue this research was later adopted by Western governments through Operation Paperclip scientists, who integrated similar methods into public water systems. Specific allegations include the existence of zone classification maps that supposedly designate areas as priority suppression territories. These maps allegedly correlate with voting patterns, with conservative-leaning counties receiving higher fluoride concentrations and liberal areas getting different chemical cocktails designed to increase anxiety and social unrest. The theory gained traction after whistleblower Karen Silkwood's case in the 1970s, though her focus was on plutonium contamination rather than behavioral modification chemicals. More recently, theorists cite Freedom of Information requests, revealing that the Environmental Protection Agency maintains detailed psychological profiles of regional populations alongside water quality data. Believers claim that certain elite communities like Martha's Vineyard and parts of Marin County appear on exemption lists, receiving only basic chlorine treatment while working-class areas get the full spectrum of additives. They point to unexplained variations in treatment protocols between neighboring districts with similar geological conditions as evidence of targeted dosing programs. The blacklist supposedly includes not just fluoride, but lithium compounds for mood stabilization, aluminum particles for increased vaccine receptivity, and synthetic estrogen derivatives for fertility reduction. Water treatment facility employees who question unusual chemical deliveries reportedly face immediate termination and non-disclosure agreements. Soviet Skin Sight refers to a series of experiments conducted throughout the 1960s where researchers claimed certain individuals could perceive colors, text, and images through their fingertips alone, completely bypassing their eyes. The most documented case involved Rosa Kuleshova from Nizhny Tagil, a woman who could allegedly read printed text simply by running her fingers across the pages. Rosa Kuleshova of Nizhny Tagil, whose alleged abilities were demonstrated on a TV program called Relay, watched by over 40 million viewers. Soviet television broadcast her demonstrations to 40 million viewers, showing her identifying colors and reading magazines while completely blindfolded. What made Kuleshova particularly compelling was the range of materials she could supposedly read through her skin. Kuleshova not only read print with her fingers, she also described pictures in magazines, on cigarette packages, and on postage stamps. She maintained her abilities even when text was placed beneath glass or cellophane, ruling out traditional touch-based reading methods like Braille. The phenomenon, scientifically termed dermo-optical perception, caught the attention of psychologist Alexei Leontiev, who used Pavlovian conditioning techniques to study these claimed abilities. Biophysicist Mikhail Smirnov attempted to explain the mechanism, theorizing that the fingers have a retina, the fingers a Z light. Soviet scientists discovered that subjects maintained their abilities when infrared heat was blocked, but lost them completely in darkness, suggesting the skin somehow processed ordinary light waves. The research revealed that test subjects perceived the same 3 color modes as normal human vision, leading researchers to believe they had discovered an entirely new sensory pathway. The program expanded when 9-year-old Lena Blisnova demonstrated similar abilities after her mother saw Kuleshova's television appearance. Gregory Razran, a Russian-American expert on Soviet psychology, declared the research had him more excited than this prospect of opening up new doors of perception. The timing wasn't coincidental. This research occurred during the height of Cold War paranormal programs, when both superpowers investigated extrasensory perception for potential military applications. This 1960s Radio Moscow report claims that several young women in the USSR can see without using their eyes. However, when Western researchers attempted to replicate the experiments under controlled conditions, the results consistently failed. Soviet researchers who decided to alternate experiments in which the woman could possibly peek and eavesdrop with experiments where peeking would be impossible, discovered that subjects could only perform when subtle visual cues remained available. Psychotropic warfare involves the weaponization of mind-altering substances to incapacitate, disorient, or control enemy forces and civilian populations. Unlike conventional chemical weapons designed to harm or eliminate, these agents target the human psyche itself. The Central Intelligence Agency's MK-Ultra program from the 1950s through the 1970s serves as the most documented example of this concept in practice. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb led experiments involving lysergic acid diethylamide, commonly known as LSD, administered to unwitting subjects including military personnel, hospital patients, and prisoners. The drug BZ, officially designated as 3-quinoclidinol benzylate, emerged as a particularly potent psychotropic weapon during the Cold War era. This odorless, colorless compound could render entire battalions helpless for days, causing vivid hallucinations and complete disorientation without permanent physical damage. Operation Chaos and Operation Artichoke expanded these research efforts, exploring compounds like dimethyltryptamine and various synthetic hallucinogens. The Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland conducted over 7,000 experiments on military volunteers, many of whom experienced lasting psychological effects decades later. Modern applications allegedly include aerosol deployment systems capable of covering large areas, with compounds engineered to penetrate gas masks and protective equipment. Reports from conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East describe unexplained mass psychological episodes among both military units and civilian populations. The 2010s saw renewed interest in so-called compliance chemicals that could theoretically make interrogation subjects more cooperative without traditional torture methods. Pharmaceutical research into compounds affecting memory formation and recall has raised concerns about potential military applications. Intelligence analysts point to unexplained behavioral anomalies during recent conflicts as possible evidence that psychotropic warfare has evolved beyond experimental stages into operational use. Reality's reality effect describes the self-reinforcing mechanism that keeps our perceived reality feeling authentic and unquestionable. The theory suggests that what we experience as reality contains built-in features that prevent us from recognizing its potentially artificial nature. The core claim centers on feedback loops within our reality system. Every time we interact with our environment and receive expected results, This strengthens our belief that what we're experiencing is genuine. Touch a hot stove, feel pain. Drop an object, watch it fall. These consistent responses create what theorists call the reality anchor effect. Proponents point to specific anomalies that suggest cracks in this system. The Mandela effect, where large groups share identical false memories, potentially reveals moments when the reality maintenance system glitches. Déjà vu experiences might represent brief glimpses of the underlying programming repeating itself. The theory draws heavily from simulation hypothesis frameworks, but focuses specifically on the psychological and perceptual mechanisms rather than the technical infrastructure. It suggests that any simulated or constructed reality would need built-in safeguards to prevent inhabitants from questioning their environment too deeply. Researchers have identified what they call reality confirmation bias, where humans automatically dismiss experiences that don't fit their reality model. When someone claims to see a glitch in the Matrix, witnesses often rationalize it away within minutes. This automatic dismissal mechanism supposedly protects the integrity of the reality experience. The effect allegedly extends to collective consciousness. Society as a whole maintains shared reality through constant reinforcement of accepted physical laws, historical narratives, and cause and effect relationships. Anyone who challenges these fundamental assumptions faces immediate social pressure to conform. Some versions of this theory suggest that certain individuals possess natural immunity to the reality effect, allowing them to perceive inconsistencies that others cannot. These people often become conspiracy theorists, mystics, or artists who try to communicate their alternate perceptions through metaphor and symbolism. The most unsettling aspect involves the possibility that questioning the reality effect too deeply might trigger defensive responses from whatever system maintains our experience, potentially including memory modification or removal of the questioner from the reality altogether. This entry suggests that every time scientists observe or measure dark energy, we actively destroy the universe. The theory builds on quantum mechanics principles where observation fundamentally changes reality. In standard quantum physics, measuring a particle forces it to choose a definite state from multiple possibilities. But this conspiracy takes that concept to a cosmic scale, claiming that when we study dark energy through telescopes and particle accelerators, we collapse the universe into increasingly unstable configurations. Dark energy makes up roughly 70% of everything that exists, driving the accelerating expansion of space itself. Scientists first discovered this mysterious force in the late 1990s by observing distant supernovas. The conspiracy suggests this discovery marked the beginning of our universe's death spiral. The core claim revolves around something called the quantum Zeno effect, where frequent observation can actually freeze or alter a quantum system's natural evolution. Applied to cosmology, each measurement of dark energy supposedly locks the universe into a more fragile state, preventing it from naturally settling into stable configurations. Supporters point to the timing of various cosmic observations coinciding with theoretical predictions about vacuum decay. They note that major dark energy surveys in the 2010s happen to align with calculations suggesting our universe exists in a false vacuum that could collapse at any moment. The Large Hadron Collider becomes particularly suspicious in this framework. Every time it reaches new energy levels or discovers new particles related to cosmic expansion, conspiracists claim we push closer to triggering a bubble of true vacuum that would annihilate everything at light speed. Some versions incorporate the many worlds interpretation, suggesting that our observations don't just damage our universe, but actively select the timeline where cosmic catastrophe becomes inevitable. Each telescope pointed at distant galaxies supposedly steers us away from realities where the universe remains stable. The theory gained traction after several prominent physicists published papers about observation effects in cosmology, though these mainstream studies focused on measurement precision rather than existential threats. Believers often cite the coincidence that dark energy research intensified just as climate change and other global crises accelerated, suggesting a cosmic connection between human curiosity and universal destruction. Thevetat of Atlantis is the demiurge suggests that a specific entity from the lost civilization controls our physical reality as a false creator god. In Gnostic traditions, the demiurge represents a malevolent or ignorant deity who traps souls in material existence, distinct from the true divine source. This being creates and maintains the physical world as a kind of prison, keeping humanity from reaching higher spiritual realms. According to this theory, Thevetat was not just any Atlantean ruler or deity, but the actual demiurge itself operating from that advanced civilization. When Atlantis fell approximately 11,600 years ago, Thevetat did not perish with the continent. Instead, this entity continued orchestrating human affairs from behind the veil of reality. The theory claims that Thevetat established what we perceive as natural laws, physical constants, and even the structure of matter itself. Every scientific discovery humans make supposedly reveals another layer of this entity's constructed reality matrix. Our technological advancement, rather than representing progress, actually deepens our entanglement in Thevetat's material trap. Some versions suggest that certain bloodlines maintain direct contact with this Atlantean demiurge, receiving instructions on how to guide civilization according to its agenda. These individuals allegedly work to prevent humanity from achieving the spiritual awakening that would allow escape from Thevetat's created reality. The theory often points to recurring symbols in architecture, currency, and media as evidence of Thevetat's continued influence, claiming these represent sigils that reinforce the demiurgic control system established during the height of Atlantean power.